Hey everyone. Tonight we were going to step away from the noise and the bright lights of our world and find a quiet spot on a lonely stretch of coast nearly 2,000 years ago. Imagine you're standing there now. The air is thick with the smell of salt and damp earth. The waves pull at the sand with a steady, hypnotic rhythm, and the only light comes from the moon and a few flickering torches up the beach. It's a world without electricity, without deadlines, and certainly without your favorite late-night snack delivery app. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive the sheer boredom, let alone the lack of basic sanitation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where and when you're tuning in from, so drop your city and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sand beneath your bare feet is coarse and cool, a mixture of fine grains and crushed shells that have been tumbled by the sea for millennia. You're on the southern tip of the Korean peninsula, in a time we would later label as 48 AD. The concepts of Korea, China, and Japan are still hazy, unformed ideas. Here, on this coast, your world is defined by the rhythm of the tides, the seasonal migration of fish, and the authority of the local clan chieftain. You and the others in your small settlement belong to one of the 12 tribes that make up a loose coalition of fortified town-states, a group that history will come to call the Gaia Confederacy. This is a mainstream historical fact. While the larger kingdoms of Goguryeo to the north and the burgeoning states of Silla and Baekje to your east and west would dominate the history books, for now this region is a patchwork of proud independent communities known for one thing above all else: iron. Your settlement is a simple affair. Thatched roof huts cluster just beyond the reach of the highest tides, nestled against a backdrop of dense, dark pine forests. The air carries the faint metallic tang of the smithy's forge. Even here by the water, you pull a rough spun cloak tighter around your shoulders, the wool still smelling of lanolin and wood smoke. The day's work is done. Fishing nets, painstakingly woven from hemp, are hung to dry on wooden racks, their dampness catching the low light. A few children are still chasing crabs in the twilight, their laughter sharp and clear in the quiet air. It's a life of predictable hardship and simple certainties. Nothing truly unexpected ever happens here. The sea gives, and the sea takes. The seasons turn. Your world is as small and as vast as the ocean in front of you. But tonight, the predictable pattern shatters. It begins as a murmur among the old fishermen, the ones whose eyes are permanently narrowed from a lifetime of staring into the sun, as glare on the water. You follow their gaze, squinting out into the deepening gloom where the sea meets the sky. At first you see nothing but the familiar gray expanse, then you catch it, a smudge, a shape that doesn't belong. It's too large to be one of the local fishing skiffs, too deliberate in its movement to be a stray log. As it slips out of a bank of sea mist, its form becomes clearer. It's a ship, but a kind you have never seen before. Its hull is high and curved, built for crossing open oceans, not for hugging the coastline. And its sail is a deep, shocking crimson, the color of spilled blood or a setting sun. It billows in the offshore breeze, a stark proclamation against the muted tones of your world. Someone showing up to your quiet fishing village in a ship like this is the ancient equivalent of a neon pink Lamborghini pulling into a sleepy, one-street town. It's just wrong. A nervous energy ripples through the people on the shore. The children stop their games and run to their mothers. The men who were packing away their gear now stand motionless, their hands hovering near the iron knives tucked into their belts. Who are they? Traders from the Han commanderies in the north? Unlikely. Their junks look nothing like this. Pirates from the islands of Wa to the east? Perhaps, but pirates rarely announce their arrival with such brazen elegance. A rumor as ethereal as the mist the ship just exited begins to pass between the onlookers. It's a whisper about a prophecy, about a divine instruction given to the new king of the central Gaia state, King Suro. The whisper says he was told to wait on the coast for a bride, a woman sent by the heavens. But the story gets stranger. The whisperers claim that this ship carries not just people, but a heavy, sacred cargo meant to pacify the sea gods. A quirky tidbit of a legend starts right here, on this beach. The idea that this vessel is weighed down by a stone pagoda, a bizarre and seemingly impractical item to haul across a treacherous ocean. You watch as the great red sail is lowered. The ship drops anchor a respectful distance from the shore, its dark silhouette rocking gently in the swell. There's a tense silence, broken only by the cry of a lone gull and the endless shushing of the waves. No one on the shore moves. No one from the ship makes any sign. The minutes stretch out, thick with uncertainty. Are you witnessing the arrival of invaders, merchants, or messengers from the gods? The very presence of this vessel challenges everything you know about your world. It suggests that the vast, empty ocean you've stared at your whole life isn't empty at all, but a road that leads to places you can't even imagine. Historians still argue whether a ship in this era from a culture so distant could have realistically made such a journey all the way from the Indian subcontinent, as the legend will later claim, or if it originated from a closer yet still foreign port in Southeast Asia or southern China. But for you, standing on this cold sand in 48 AD, the academic debate is meaningless. The impossible is floating right there in your harbor. A small boat is being lowered from its side, and figures are beginning to descend. Your heart pounds against your ribs. The story of your people, and perhaps the story of this entire peninsula, is about to change forever. As the small boat makes its slow, deliberate way toward the shore, let's pull your perspective back for a moment, lifting you up from the sand so you can see this place for what it truly is. This coastline isn't just a random strip of land. It's the gateway to a complex and thriving world. You are in the heartland of the Gaia Confederacy, a vibrant collection of city-states nestled in the fertile plains of the Nakdong River Delta. Picture it as a patchwork quilt of communities, each with its own chief, its own customs, and its own particular brand of pride. Unlike the more centralized kingdoms that are beginning to flex their muscles elsewhere on the peninsula, Gaia is decentralized. This political structure, a league of allied states rather than a single unified kingdom, is a core mainstream historical fact of the era. It gives them a certain scrappy resilience, but it's also a critical weakness, a seam that rival powers will one day learn to exploit. For now, though, this land is prosperous. The river valleys are lush and green, yielding generous harvests of rice and millet. The hills are cloaked in thick forests teeming with game. But the true source of Gaia's wealth, the engine of its power, and the reason its name is known far and wide, lies buried beneath the earth. Iron. This isn't just a place that has iron. This place is iron. The ground is rich with high-quality iron ore, and the people here have become master metallurgists. In every major settlement, the smoke from the forges is a permanent feature of the sky. The rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil is the music of their economy. You can almost feel the heat shimmer in the air, smell the sharp, metallic scent of cooling steel. They produce everything from humble farming tools, plowshares and sickles that make the land more productive, to the weapons of war that make their neighbors nervous. Their swords are sharp, their arrowheads are lethal, and their armor is legendary. They export this iron, both as raw ingots and as finished goods, making this region a crucial hub in the maritime trade networks of ancient East Asia. Forget stocks and bonds. In first-century Gaia, a well-made iron helmet is the ultimate blue-chip investment. The society built on this iron foundation is sophisticated and highly stratified. At the top are the chiefs and a warrior aristocracy, nobles who live in large wooden compounds and are buried in impressive earthen mounds called tumuli. When one of these nobles dies, their tomb is filled with the trappings of their power. Dozens of pottery vessels, bronze ornaments, and of course a staggering amount of iron. Sometimes entire sets of armor, shields, and weaponry are interred with the deceased, ensuring they are well equipped for whatever comes next. Below them are the artisans, the blacksmiths and potters whose skills are the lifeblood of the kingdom. And below them, the farmers, fishermen, and laborers who form the backbone of the community. It's a tough, hierarchical world, but one with a shared identity forged in fire and a common purpose built on trade. They are a practical, industrious people, yet their worldview is deeply steeped in myth and ritual. Their spiritual life is rich with animistic beliefs. They see spirits in the mountains, the rivers, and the ancient trees. Shamans act as intermediaries between the human and spirit worlds, performing rituals to ensure good harvests and successful battles. This spiritual dimension is most beautifully expressed in their pottery. While much of it is functional, the ceremonial stoneware they create is extraordinary. It's a hard, gray pottery, fired at extremely high temperatures in sloping tunnel kilns, a technique they had perfected. And the shapes they create are wonderfully imaginative. You find vessels shaped like houses, animals, and even warriors on horseback. But the most charming and common motif, a real quirky tidbit of their culture, is the duck. You see duck-shaped pots everywhere in their ceremonial contexts. For the people of Gaia, the duck was a psychopomp, a creature that could travel between the worlds of water, earth, and air. They believed that the souls of the dead needed a guide to navigate the treacherous waters of the underworld. And these little clay ducks were their eternal, unsinkable ferrymen. It's a wonderfully gentle concept from a people known for making such deadly weapons. Of course, the internal politics of this iron-rich confederacy are anything but gentle. It's a competitive environment. Historians still argue whether King Suro's state, Gyumguan Gaya, located at the mouth of the Nakdong River, was the undisputed leader of the confederacy right from the start, or if it was merely the first among equals. Other states, like Degaya further inland, had their own ambitions and would eventually rise to challenge Gyumguan Gaya's dominance. Imagine it as a group of sibling companies all technically under one family brand, but constantly trying to one-up each other, steal each other's clients, and prove that their CEO is the real favorite. This constant internal jostling for position means that while the people on the beach share a common Gaia identity, their ultimate loyalty is to their own chief and their own town. And it is into this world, a world of masterful smiths, duck-shaped spirit guides, and simmering political rivalries, that the small boat is now arriving. The keel scrapes against the wet sand and pebbles of the shoreline, a sound that cuts through the tense silence. The men on board are not fishermen. They are dressed in fine, foreign fabrics, and their features are subtly different from those of the locals. They move with the practiced confidence of official envoys. For the people of Gaia watching from the beach, this is no longer just a strange ship. It is an embassy from an unknown world, and its arrival is a direct challenge to the order of things. You can feel the collective breath being held. The first person to step out of the boat is not a warrior or a merchant, but a court official, who plants a banner in the wet sand. And then he turns back to the boat and offers a hand to help the passenger, who will change everything. Before that offered hand is taken, before a foreign sandal presses into the wet sand of the beach, you need to understand why this arrival hasn't been met with a volley of arrows. To do that, you have to leave the coast, traveling inland a few miles to the bustling heart of the kingdom of Gyumguan Gaya. You move past the blacksmith's forges and the potter's kilns, through the noisy marketplace and into the walled compound of the royal court. Here, seated on a simple wooden throne, is the man whose decision has shaped this entire day, King Suro. He is young, said to be only in his late teens, yet he carries the authority of a man who has built a nation from the ground up. And according to the foundational myth of his kingdom, he quite literally has. This is where his story, and the story of Gaia, gets wonderfully weird. King Suro's origin story is not one of boring political succession. It's pure, undiluted myth, and it's the quirky or fringe tidbit that underpins his entire reign. The tale, recorded centuries later in a book of histories and legends, says that before he was king, the region was a chaotic mess of 9 competing clans with no central leader. The heavens, apparently tired of the bickering, decided to intervene. A strange song was heard from a peak called Guji Bong, and when the clan leaders gathered there, they saw a golden box wrapped in red cloth descending from the sky on a rope. Inside the box were 6 shining golden eggs. A heavenly voice declared that these eggs were destined to become kings. Suro was the first to hatch, emerging from his egg as a boy who grew to manhood in a matter of days. The other 5 eggs became the kings of the other 5 Gaia states. You have to admit, hatched from a celestial golden egg looks fantastic on a resume and pretty much ends any argument about your qualifications for leadership. This divine mandate gives Suro an almost untouchable authority. He has unified the local clans, established his capital, and is busy laying the foundations of a kingdom that will last for centuries. But he has one glaring problem. a source of constant anxiety for his court officials. He has no queen. His advisors are perpetually nagging him, presenting him with scrolls listing the eligible daughters of powerful local families. Your Majesty, a marriage to the daughter of the Cho clan will secure our western flank. Your Majesty, the Li clan has much wealth. An alliance would fill our coffers. This is the way of the world here. The mainstream historical fact is that for these early Korean states, marriage was the primary tool of diplomacy and power consolidation. A strategic marriage was worth more than 1,000 soldiers. It bound powerful families together, smoothed over rivalries, and, most importantly, produced heirs to continue the royal line. But Suro refuses. You are there in the throne room as he listens patiently to his chief courtiers. They are practical, worried men, but Suro operates on a different level. He holds up a hand, silencing their pleas. He tells them he understands their concerns, but that his choice of a queen cannot be a simple matter of political convenience. And then he drops the bombshell. He announces that he has received a divine command. The sky god, the same one who sent him down in a golden egg, has spoken to him in a dream. The god told him not to worry, that the throne would not remain empty. His destined bride, the woman chosen for him by heaven itself, was already on her way. The command was simple and absolute. Go to the southern coast and wait. Your queen is coming. You can imagine the stunned silence in the room. This is either an act of supreme faith or supreme arrogance. He is actively snubbing the most powerful families in his own kingdom, the very people whose support he needs, all based on a dream. It's the ancient royal equivalent of telling all your dating app matches, sorry, I'm holding out for a literal angel to fall from the sky. It's a monumental gamble. If no one shows up, he looks like a fool. If he's perceived as weak or indecisive, his rivals within the Confederacy might see an opportunity. The stability of his young kingdom hangs on the truth of this prophecy. And this leads to a fascinating point of contention. Historians still argue whether King Suro Inda's prophetic dream was a genuine mystical experience or a masterful piece of political stagecraft. Was he a truly devout man acting on a vision? Or was he a shrewd politician who needed a bulletproof excuse to reject local alliances he found unappealing? It's possible he already knew, via his extensive trade networks, that a high-status foreign delegation was en route. By framing their arrival as a divinely ordained event, he could elevate his own status and that of his future queen, placing her far above the squabbles of local clan politics. It's a brilliant move if you think about it, turning a potentially disruptive foreign arrival into the fulfillment of heavenly destiny. This is why the men on the beach aren't armed for battle. They are an official welcoming party, led by a high-ranking courtier. King Suro himself had commanded them to take a boat, go to a nearby island, and watch the horizon. And from that vantage point, they saw it, the red-sailed ship, just as the prophecy implicitly promised. Now back on the mainland shore, they are not facing a potential threat, but a potential messiah. The entire credibility of their celestial king is riding on the identity of the person in that boat. So as the court official offers his hand, it's not just a gesture of courtesy, it is an act of faith. And the person in the boat, a woman whose face is veiled by a fine silk scarf, finally moves. She places her slender hand in his and prepares to step onto the soil of Gaia. The prophecy is about to be tested.
As her silk-slippered foot hovers over the sand. A threshold between the sea and the land. Let's trace her journey backward. Let's spool time in reverse, following the wake of that red-sailed ship, out past the coastal islands, across the vast and churning expanse of the ocean. The journey from her home took months. A terrifying odyssey across pirate-infested waters and through brutal, unpredictable storms. So where did she come from? Where on the ancient map was the starting point for this divine bride? The Korean chronicle that tells her story, the Samguk user, gives her homeland a name, Ayut, and with that single enigmatic word, it opens up one of the most fascinating debates in ancient history. Let's travel to the place most famously associated with that name. You leave the cool, damp air of the Korean coast behind and find yourself in a world of suffocating heat and dazzling light. The air is thick with the scent of jasmine, cardamom, and roasting spices. The sounds are a riotous symphony, the chatter of a dozen different languages in a crowded bazaar, the rhythmic clang of a temple bell, the lowing of sacred cattle wandering through the streets. You are in 1st century Ayodhya, a legendary city on the banks of the Sarayu River in northern India. This is a civilization at its peak, an ancient and deeply sophisticated culture. Grand stone temples covered in intricate carvings reach for the sky. Scholars in saffron robes debate philosophy in shaded courtyards. The wealth of the world flows through here. The plausibility of this Indian origin story is supported by a crucial mainstream historical fact. The 1st century AD was the golden age of the maritime Silk Road. A vibrant network of sea lanes connected the Roman Mediterranean to the ports of India, Southeast Asia, and all the way to the Han Dynasty in China. Knowledge of monsoon winds had turned the Indian Ocean into a highway for commerce. While a direct voyage from India to Korea would have been exceptionally rare and perilous, it was not, strictly speaking, impossible for a well-equipped and determined crew. It would have been the ancient equivalent of a moonshot, incredibly ambitious, wildly dangerous, but theoretically achievable, according to the legend. The princess's journey began with a dream that perfectly mirrored King Suro's. You are in the opulent court of Ayutthaya. The king and queen are troubled. Their daughter, the Princess Hyo Wangoke, has come of age, yet they have had to refuse all local suitors. One night, they both have the same dream. A heavenly god appears and tells them the great king of Gayasuro was sent from heaven to rule. He is still in want of a queen, so you are to send your daughter to him. The command is absolute. The princess is to be their kingdom's most precious export. So they prepare a ship, load it with treasures, and send their beloved daughter off into the unknown, trusting a divine command. It's a beautiful, symmetrical story of destiny, with the gods playing the role of celestial matchmaker for two chosen people on opposite sides of the continent. But is Ayutthaya really Ayutthaya? This is where the debate ignites. Historians still argue whether Ayutthaya is a direct phonetic transliteration of Ayuda, or if it refers to another place entirely, its name distorted by centuries of oral retelling. The Indian connection is compelling, but it's not the only theory. Some scholars point eastward, toward Thailand. The name of the later Great Thai Kingdom, Ayutthaya, is phonetically almost identical. Problem. The Ayutthaya Kingdom wasn't founded until the 1350s, over 1,000 years too late. Proponents of this theory suggest she may have come from a smaller, earlier proto-Thai state in the same region, whose name was a precursor to the more famous one. Trying to pin down ancient place names can be like trying to find a specific coffee shop called The Grind in a major city. There are a lot of contenders and not much definitive proof. Other theories point to a region in China's Sichuan province, citing possible linguistic links and archaeological finds that suggest a trade connection. The truth is, we don't know for sure. The name Ayutthaya is a historical puzzle box. Yet, there is one tantalizing clue, a quirky tidbit of iconography that strongly supports the Indian theory. It's the symbol of the twin fish. In Gaya, the royal crest of King Suro's dynasty, found carved on the gates of his tomb, is a pair of fish facing each other. This symbol is not native to Korea. It's an outlier in their traditional art. But in India, the twin fish is an ancient and powerful symbol of royalty and good fortune, one of the 8 sacred symbols of Ashtamangala. More specifically, it was the emblem of the ancient kingdom of Ayodhya and remains a significant symbol in the modern Indian state of Uttar Pradesh, where Ayodhya is located. For two such distant cultures to share such a specific and unusual royal crest seems to defy coincidence. It's a silent, stony piece of evidence that whispers of a real connection across the vastness of the sea. It's the kind of detail that makes you lean forward and say, okay, maybe this legend isn't just a legend. So, as the princess finally brings her foot down, the silk of her slipper meeting the grit of the Gaya sand, the mystery of her origin only adds to her mystique. It doesn't truly matter if the air she last breathed was scented with Indian spices or Thai blossoms. What matters is that she is foreign, she is other. She is the physical embodiment of a wider world that the people of Gaya had only ever glimpsed through traded goods and sailors' tales. Her arrival is the moment that world walks off a ship and into their lives, bringing with it new ideas, new blood, and a new destiny for their kingdom. Her 10,000-mile journey is over. Her new one, as a queen, has just begun.
What is going through her mind in that monumental second, as the familiar role of the ship S-deck is replaced by the unyielding firmness of a new continent? To understand the sheer, heart-stopping courage it took for her to take that step, we have to travel back one last time to her final days in the kingdom of Ayutthaya. You are with her now in her royal chambers. The air is warm and scented with sandalwood incense. Intricately carved wooden screens filter the harsh sunlight into soft, dappled patterns on the polished stone floor. Servants move with silent efficiency, laying out bolts of shimmering silk, organizing chests of gold jewelry, and carefully wrapping delicate porcelain. This is the protected, luxurious, and predictable world she has known for all of her 16 years. And she is about to leave it forever. The legend frames it as a simple act of obedience to a divine command. But for the girl at the center of it all, Princess Heo Huang Ok, it must have been an earthquake that shook the foundations of her existence. Imagine the conversations, the sleepless nights. She's being sent across the world to marry a man she's never met, in a land whose name she'd never heard, to fulfill a destiny she had no say in. There must have been fear, a deep and gnawing terror of the unknown. Yet, there must also have been a profound sense of duty, a belief in the prophecy that her parents described, and perhaps, just perhaps, a tiny, thrilling flicker of adventure for a princess whose life was likely already mapped out for her within the same palace walls. This was a terrifying and exhilarating escape into the truly unknown. So you watch as she oversees the packing. This isn't just a weekend trip. She's packing for a new life, and she has no idea what she'll need. There are the obvious things, the items that constitute a royal dowry, chests overflowing with gold coins, pearls the size of grapes and gemstones that glitter in the lamplight. Bolts of the finest silk, dyed in vibrant hues of saffron, indigo, and crimson, are carefully folded. These are not just pretty things. They are a demonstration of her kingdom's wealth and power. They are her diplomatic opening statement. Then there are the personal items. A favorite musical instrument, a small carved statue of a household deity, perhaps even a pouch of seeds from her mother's garden, a desperate attempt to cultivate a piece of home in a foreign soil. And then there is the most bizarre item on the packing list. You follow the princess out into the bustling port where her ship, the one with the crimson sails, is being loaded. Dock workers are straining, their muscles taut, using a complex system of ropes and rollers to guide an impossibly heavy object onto the deck. It's a small stone pagoda, or stupa, intricately carved but undeniably made of solid rock. This is the quirky tidbit at the heart of her journey, the Pasa Stone Pagoda. Why in the name of all the gods would you weigh down a ship meant for a treacherous ocean crossing with several tons of decorative stone? It's the most extra piece of carry-on luggage in human history. The legend provides a magical explanation. Her father told her that the spirits of the ocean are tempestuous and that this sacred stone would pacify them, ensuring her safe passage. It was, in essence, a divine life preserver. But what was it really? Historians still argue whether the Pasa Stone Pagoda was a purely religious artifact, a tangible piece of her faith, be it early Buddhism or Hinduism, meant to sanctify her new home, or if it had a more practical function that was simply mythologized over time. Some have theorized it might have been a unique form of ballast, its specific weight and density crucial for stabilizing this particular vessel. Others wonder if it could have been a sophisticated navigational or astronomical marker, its carvings holding some lost scientific meaning. Whatever its true purpose for Princess Hio, it was a tangible link to the divine protection she so desperately needed. It was her anchor of faith in a sea of uncertainty. To carry such a strange, heavy cargo required a serious piece of engineering. The mainstream historical fact is that the shipbuilding technology of this period, particularly in the Indian Ocean and South China Sea, was highly advanced. Her vessel was no simple raft. You can see it there at the docks, a robust, ocean-going ship. It likely had a solid teak hull, multiple masts to catch the monsoon winds, and perhaps even a compartmentalized design to prevent sinking if one section was breached. It was the first-century equivalent of a state-of-the-art research vessel, built to withstand the worst the ocean could throw at it. It had to be, to serve as a royal chariot for a princess and her entire retinue of servants and officials, not to mention her pet rock. Finally, the day of departure arrives. You stand on the docks with her parents, the king and queen of Ayutthaya. The farewells are heavy with the knowledge that they will almost certainly never see their daughter again. Her mother presses a small, familiar object into her hand. Her father looks her in the eye and gives her one final piece of her identity to hold on to. Remember, he might have said, the God that sent King Suro from the sky is the same God that commands us. Our blood is divine. Wherever you go, you are a queen. Do not forget it. And with that memory, that final blessing, we crash back to the present moment on the cold gray beach in Gaia. You look at the young woman who has just stepped ashore, and you no longer see just a mysterious figure. You see the scared teenager who left home, the determined survivor who crossed the world's biggest ocean, and the diplomat carrying the wealth of one kingdom to the feet of another. She takes another step forward, away from the boat, away from her past. The Gaia officials, awestruck, drop into a deep bow. Her face is still hidden by a veil, but her posture is straight, her head held high. She is the fulfillment of a prophecy. She is a queen. The solid ground feels alien beneath her feet. For the better part of a season, her entire world has been the endless, churning motion of the sea, a universe confined to the weathered planks of a single ship. You are on that vessel with her now, somewhere in the vast blue emptiness of the South China Sea. The world is a hypnotic and often terrifying chaos of wind, water, and creaking wood. Life on board has fallen into a monotonous rhythm. The sun rises, painting the sky in brilliant colors that are briefly beautiful before the oppressive heat of the day sets in. The sun sets, and the world becomes a terrifying, inky blackness, punctuated only by the cold light of the stars. There's no Wi-Fi, no streaming service, not even a decent book. The onboard entertainment consists of watching the sailors mend the crimson sail, listening to the same tired sea shanties, and trying to guess which of the dried fish you're having for dinner is the least likely to give you food poisoning. The ship is a microcosm of her kingdom, a floating piece of ayuda. In her cabin, surrounded by her silks and a few precious mementos, she maintains the decorum of a princess. Her servants and courtiers attend to her, but the strict protocols of the palace feel absurd out here. Everyone is equal in the face of a 30-foot wave. The air is never truly dry. A film of salt spray coats every surface. The constant rocking of the ship becomes a part of your own heartbeat, a motion so incessant that you fear you will never feel stillness again. The days bleed into weeks, and the weeks into months. Homesickness is a dull, constant ache. Fear is her unwelcome but ever-present companion, and there is much to fear. One afternoon, a lookout shouts from the masthead, "Another ship is on the horizon, its silhouette low and fast." It's not a merchant vessel. A tense quiet falls over your ship as the sailors arm themselves with swords and bows. Pirates are a constant menace in these waters, preying on the rich trade routes. You watch the other ship for an agonizing hour as it shadows you, a shark circling its prey. The Princess Heo Huang-ok stands on the deck, her expression unreadable. Then, for reasons you'll never know, the pirate ship changes course and vanishes back into the haze. You've been spared, but the encounter leaves a chilling reminder of how vulnerable you are. But the pirates are nothing compared to the wrath of the ocean itself. One night, the sky turns a sickly shade of green-black. The sea, which had been calm, begins to heave in great oily swells. The wind rises from a moan to a shriek. A typhoon has you in its grip. Waves as tall as hills crash over the deck, sweeping away anything not tied down. The mast groans, threatening to splinter. Below deck, you are tossed about in the darkness, listening to the terrifying symphony of the storm, convinced that each lurch and shudder will be your last. It is in this moment of absolute terror that the legend of the Pasa Stone Pagoda is truly born. According to the chronicle, the journey was plagued by such storms, the sea gods enraged by this foreign intrusion. In a moment of desperation, the princess orders her men to unwrap the stone pagoda on the deck and make offerings. This is the quirky tidbit in action. As prayers are chanted to the strange stone, the wind begins to lessen, the waves lose their fury, and the storm passes. From this point on, the stone is no longer just cargo. It is their talisman, their divine protector, the anchor of their hope. Surviving the storms, however, required more than just faith. The mainstream historical fact is that the sailors of this era were masters of celestial navigation. You watch the ship's captain at night, his face weathered like an old sea chart, reading the stars. He uses the position of the North Star and the constellations to plot his course, a skill that seems like pure magic. During the day, he gauges their latitude from the height of the sun. They follow the coast when they can, recognizing landmarks, but in the open ocean, the stars are their only map. They also understand the seasonal monsoon winds, the great air currents that act as a natural engine for their crimson sail, pushing them northeastward toward their destination. Even with skilled navigators, the sheer scale of the journey is staggering. Historians still argue whether a single, continuous voyage from India to Korea was actually undertaken, or if the legend condenses a more probable series of shorter, sequential journeys. It's more likely that the ship didn't just sail non-stop for 3 months. They probably island-hopped and made port along the coasts of modern-day Vietnam and China, resupplying on fresh water and food, trading for information, and waiting for favorable winds. This turns the journey from a single, miraculous sprint into a grueling, long-distance marathon. It's less of a direct flight and more of a series of connecting layovers, each with its own risks and uncertainties. Finally, after months at sea, the air changes. It grows cooler. The color of the water shifts. The seabirds are different. Then, one morning, the lookout's cry is not one of alarm, but of joy. Land. You rush to the deck with everyone else and you see it, a hazy blue-green line on the horizon. As you draw closer, it resolves into rolling hills covered in pine trees. This is it. This is Gaia. The relief that washes over the ship is overwhelming. People are weeping, laughing, praying. The journey, the impossible, terrifying journey, is over. Now, as she stands on the beach, the memory of the heaving deck is still in her muscles. The roar of the typhoon still echoes in her ears. She has been tested by the sea, and she has endured. She looks at the faces of the people who have come to greet her, their expressions a mixture of awe and suspicion. She has crossed the great ocean that separated her world from theirs. Now, she just has to cross the few hundred feet of sand that separates a princess from her throne. The silence on the beach is thick and heavy, broken only by the rhythmic pull of the waves and the distant cry of gulls. Two worlds are staring at each other across a few yards of wet sand, a space charged with 2,000 years of future history. On one side, you have the welcoming party from Gaia. They are led by a nobleman, a high-ranking courtier named Shingui Gan. He and his men are dressed in sturdy robes of hemp fiber, their faces weathered by the sun and sea wind. They stand awkwardly, trying to look dignified and official, but their nervousness is palpable. This is the most important diplomatic mission of their lives, and they have no idea what the protocol is for welcoming a bride who may or may not have been shipped here by the gods. On the other side, you have the arrivals. The princess, Heo Huang Oke, has now been joined by her entourage of about 20 people. They look utterly alien. Their clothes are made of fine cotton and silk, fabrics that are incredibly rare and valuable here. The colors are richer, the cut more elegant. They look like they've stepped out of a different, much more stylish dimension. They are weary from their travels, their faces thin, but they hold themselves with the unshakable poise of people from a powerful, ancient civilization. They are outnumbered and on foreign soil, but they are the ones who seem to be in control. Finally, Shingui Gan, the Gaia official, knows he must act. He steps forward, his boots sinking slightly into the damp sand. He performs a deep formal bow, a gesture of profound respect. He then straightens up and begins to speak in the local tongue, his voice a little too loud, a little too strained. His words of welcome are carried away by the breeze, likely understood by no one but his own men. This is the first and most obvious hurdle, the language barrier. A mainstream historical fact of any such ancient cross-cultural encounter is the immense difficulty of communication. There was no universal language, no translation app. Communication would have been a slow, frustrating process of gestures, or perhaps reliant on a chain of translators if her entourage included someone who knew one of the pidgin trade languages of the Asian maritime routes. The princess listens patiently until he is finished. Then she makes a gesture to one of her own officials who steps forward to speak. But it is her first act that truly matters. She lifts her veil slightly, revealing her face to the Gaia delegation for the first time. She is young, just as the prophecy hinted, and then, through whatever means of translation they have, she delivers her opening lines. And this is the quirky tidbit that elevates this moment from a simple greeting to a masterclass in political maneuvering. She does not say, "Hello, thank you for welcoming me." She says, "I am the Princess of Ayuta. My father and mother, the king and queen, had a dream in which the great sky god appeared. He told them that the destined king of Gaia was a man named Suro, and that he had been sent from the heavens to rule. The god commanded my parents to send me here to be his partner. It's an absolutely brilliant move." In one statement, she confirms her royal status, validates King Suro's divine origin story, and frames her own arrival not as a random event, but as the explicit will of the same God who installed their king. She's not just a potential bride, she's the other half of a divine plan. It's the ancient equivalent of showing up for a blind date and saying, "By the way, the universe itself arranged this, so no pressure, but this is definitely happening." The relief on the faces of the Gaia officials is immediate and immense. The king wasn't crazy. The prophecy is real. She is the one. Of course, the eloquent, almost poetic speeches recorded centuries later in the Samguk Yusa were likely polished for dramatic effect. Historians still argue whether these recorded dialogues represent the actual words spoken on the beach, or if they are an idealized literary reconstruction designed to give the founding story of the kingdom a suitably epic and romantic flavor. It's probable that the core message was conveyed through a much clunkier process, but the intent behind it, the immediate establishment of her divine right to be there, is undeniable. Overjoyed, Xin Guigan bows again, even more deeply this time, and formally invites the princess to the temporary palace that has been prepared for her. He gestures toward a path leading from the beach, where palanquins and an honor guard are waiting. It is time to go and meet her future husband. And then, the princess does something completely unexpected. She refuses. Politely, but firmly, she declines the invitation. Through her translator, she explains her reasoning. I have traveled a great distance to come here, it is true. But you are strangers to me and I to you. How can I, a royal princess, follow you so lightly to an unknown place? This is a stunning moment of self-assertion. She is not a passive piece of cargo to be delivered to the king. She is a princess, and she has her own sense of propriety and status. She is subtly reminding them that while she may be in their land, she operates by her own rules. It's a power play, and a very effective one. She is forcing the king to be the one to make the next move, to come to her, to prove that he is worthy of her. It's a first-century mic drop. The Gaia officials are completely flustered. Their simple task of pick up the magic sky bride has suddenly become a delicate diplomatic negotiation. They have welcomed their queen, and on her very first day she has already shown them that she is not a woman to be taken lightly. The standoff is perfectly polite, but it is a standoff nonetheless. The first contact has been made, and the foreign princess has already won. The Gaia officials are in a bind. Their divine guest has politely but firmly put them in time out on the beach. They can't exactly storm back to the boat and complain to customer service. Xin Guigan, the head courtier, does the only thing he can do. He sends a messenger scrambling back to the capital to tell King Suro what happened. This leaves the princess and her entourage in a state of limbo on the shore, a diplomatic island between their ship and the kingdom they've come to join. So, while that poor messenger is sprinting through the woods, likely rehearsing how to tell a demigod his mail-order bride is refusing delivery, let's take a look at what else is coming ashore from that red-sailed ship. The princess is not one to sit around and wait. With a few quiet words, she directs her servants. They move with practiced efficiency, transforming a nearby grassy hillock overlooking the sea into a small, temporary piece of ayuta. Silk tents, dyed a deep blue, are erected. Fine patterned rugs are unrolled onto the grass. Small folding tables of dark carved wood are set up. In less than an hour, they have created a royal encampment that makes the local Gaia chiefs' dwellings look like rustic hunting lodges. It's another subtle but clear demonstration of power and sophistication. Then, the real show begins. The ship's crew begins to unload the cargo, and crate by heavy crate, the princess's dowry is brought to shore. You stand with the awestruck locals watching a procession of wonders. First come the chests of treasure. There is gold, of course, but it's the craftsmanship that dazzles. Intricately worked jewelry, delicate chains, and heavy armlets that gleam in the afternoon sun. There are gemstones, deep blue lapis lazuli, fiery carnelian, and smooth, polished jade. Then come the textiles. The people of Gaia are masters of iron, but their clothing is made of coarse hemp and wool. Now they see bolts of fabric so fine it seems to float on the air. Silk in colors they've never seen before, and soft, patterned cotton. The wealth on display is staggering, but it's not just about flashy goods. Her arrival represents a massive injection of new information and materials into this relatively isolated society. The mainstream historical fact is that this kind of long-distance contact was the primary engine of cultural and technological diffusion in the ancient world. While the legend focuses on treasure, her entourage would have brought knowledge. Perhaps they introduced new weaving techniques or dye-making processes. Maybe they brought scrolls detailing astronomical observations or medical remedies unknown in Gaia. They also unload sealed clay jars that, when opened, release the most intoxicating aromas. Spices like cinnamon, cloves, and black pepper. The local cuisine is simple, based on grains, fish, and whatever can be foraged. The scent of these spices is as alien and magical as the silk. It is like someone who has only ever eaten boiled potatoes is suddenly introduced to a 5-star curry. It's a sensory revolution. Among the more practical items, the chronicles mention one particularly symbolic gift, a wonderful quirky tidbit: peaches. This might seem mundane, but in many Eastern mythologies, peaches are deeply associated with immortality and longevity. They are the food of the gods, the fruit that grants eternal life. By bringing peaches to her new home, the princess isn't just bringing a healthy snack. She is symbolically offering a blessing of long life and a prosperous, near-immortal reign to the new royal family she is about to create with Suro. Of course, the scale and nature of this dowry is a matter of some debate. Historians still argue whether the treasures described in the chronicles were a literal inventory of goods, or if the list was embellished over time to aggrandize the kingdom's founding story. Was it a truly massive transfer of wealth that fundamentally altered the Gaia economy? Or was it a more modest, though still impressive collection of diplomatic gifts meant to symbolize the prestige of her home kingdom? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. It wasn't a Brinks truck, but it certainly wasn't a welcome basket with a few muffins either. Meanwhile, the messenger, panting and covered in sweat, finally reaches the royal court and blurts out his news to King Suro. You're there in the throne room, watching the king's reaction. The prophesied queen has arrived. She is regal, she is beautiful, and she respectfully declines to be shuffled over to the palace like a piece of luggage. A lesser man might be insulted, his pride wounded. But Suro, according to the legend, is delighted. He throws his head back and laughs. Her refusal, her proud insistence on propriety, is the ultimate proof of her royal blood. She isn't some meek, pliable girl from a lesser clan. She is his equal, a woman of destiny who knows her own worth. This is exactly the kind of queen he needs to build a dynasty. Suro rises from his throne. The standoff on the beach will be resolved, and it will be resolved on her terms. He doesn't send his courtiers back with a stronger invitation. He decides to go himself. He gives a series of rapid-fire commands. The palace is to be decorated. A grand feast is to be prepared. The finest robes are to be laid out for him and his entire court. He will not summon her. He will welcome her. He will show her the respect she has so cleverly demanded. The initial, awkward first contact is over. Now, the grand formal courtship is about to begin, not with a quiet meeting in a palace room, but with a royal procession from the king of Gaia to the queen from a distant land. The air in the capital of Gumguan Gaia is electric. King Suro's command has sent the royal household into a flurry of organized chaos. Servants rush to hang decorative banners. Cooks begin preparing a feast fit for a woman who crossed an ocean, and courtiers don their most formal and likely most uncomfortable robes. You stand with the honor guard as it assembles in the main courtyard. Sunlight glints off the polished scales of their iron armor and the sharp tips of their spears. This isn't just a welcoming party, it's a statement. Suro is about to show the foreign princess that while her homeland may have silks and spices, his has the formidable power of iron. The procession sets off, a river of metal and formal attire flowing from the capital toward the coast. King Suro himself rides at its head, his posture radiating a calm and absolute authority. He is no longer the anxious young king waiting on a prophecy. He is a monarch going to claim his queen. As they draw near the coast, you can see the small encampment on the hill, the blue silk tents a stark, elegant contrast to the rugged green and brown of the landscape. It's a tiny foreign island in the middle of his kingdom. Suro's procession halts at the base of the hill. He dismounts and begins to walk up the gentle slope, accompanied only by his closest advisors and, of course, a translator. This is a moment of vulnerability, of respect. He is entering her space. At the top of the hill, Heo Huang Oke emerges from her tent, attended by her own courtiers. And there, for the first time, the two protagonists of this story finally lay eyes on each other. It's a moment thick with unspoken questions. He sees a young woman who possesses a poise that belies her years, a survivor who carries the mystery of a distant civilization in her gaze. She sees a man who, despite his divine origin story, looks entirely human. young, strong, and with the weight of a new kingdom resting on his shoulders. For a moment that stretches into an eternity, they simply assess each other, the two halves of a prophecy finally in the same place. Breaking the regal silence, the princess speaks first, her voice clear and melodic. And what she says is the most wonderful, charming, quirky tidbit in the entire legend. It's a perfect diplomatic icebreaker. After a formal greeting, she looks at him with what one can only imagine is a slight, knowing smile and says through her translator, "I am of a distant and humble lineage, and never would I have expected to be in the presence of someone as august as you. And yet, it seems the heavens have brought me here to serve you." Then comes the brilliant part. "I have known of the king's great countenance from before I ever saw it." It's a fantastically smooth line. It's flirtatious, respectful, and reinforces the idea of destiny all at once. It's the first-century equivalent of "you're even more handsome than you were in my prophetic dreams." Suro, clearly charmed, smiles back. He doesn't miss a beat. His reply is equally gracious and politically astute. "I too knew that a princess was coming from afar," he says. "My advisors urged me to take a bride from among the noble ladies of my kingdom, but I refused. I told them the heavens would choose my queen. Now that you, the virtuous princess, have come to me of your own accord, it is the greatest fortune of my life." This careful translated dialogue is the centerpiece of their first meeting. It's a dance of diplomacy, with each partner perfectly matching the other's steps. This union was, from a political standpoint, a stroke of genius. The mainstream historical fact is that the biggest threat to any new monarch in a confederacy like Gaia was the ambition of other powerful clans. By marrying a local noblewoman, Suro would have pleased one family while alienating all the others. But by marrying a foreign princess, especially one with a sent-from-heaven backstory that matched his own, he elevated his new royal line completely outside and above the petty squabbles of local politics. Her foreignness was her superpower. She had no family ties, no local allegiances, no hidden agenda. Her only loyalty was to him and the new dynasty they would create together. Of course, the seamless romantic perfection of this first meeting has been a subject of endless fascination. Historians still argue whether this encounter was truly the divinely guided, spontaneous event the legend portrays, or the carefully scripted final act of a long-negotiated diplomatic alliance. Could her arrival have been arranged in advance through shadowy contacts on the maritime trade routes, with the prophecies serving as a public relations campaign to sell the union to their respective peoples? We may never know if their first words were expressions of genuine surprise and destiny, or simply the polished opening lines of a play that had been in rehearsal for months. Whatever the reality, the meeting is a resounding success. The connection between them is palpable. King Suro, his hospitality and respect now properly demonstrated, extends his hand and once again invites the princess to the palace he has prepared for her. This time, with a graceful nod, she accepts. Her honor has been satisfied. The courtship can officially begin. You watch as the two processions merge into one. The iron-clad soldiers of Gaia now march alongside the silk-robed servants of Ayuda. The banners of the king mingle with the foreign standards of the princess. It's a living, moving symbol of the new, blended culture that is about to be born. As they travel back toward the capital, the local people who had been watching from a safe distance now line the path, their fear replaced by celebration. They cheer for the king who fulfilled his prophecy, and for the beautiful, mysterious queen who came from the sea. The procession comes to a halt before the gates of a newly built and beautifully decorated palace. This will be her home. The journey is over. The courtship is beginning. She has arrived not just in Gaia, but in her new life. You might think that after a successful meet-cute orchestrated by the gods themselves, they'd just rush to the altar. But this is a royal union, not a rom-com, and there are procedures to follow. The princess and her entourage are shown to the magnificent new palace prepared for them. It's beautifully constructed from local pine, but King Suro has had his artisans furnish it in a style he hopes she will find familiar, using the treasures she brought as inspiration. For 2 days, she and her servants are given space to rest, recover from their journey, and prepare. This isn't just about getting over sea legs. It's a calculated period of transition, allowing the court, and the people to get used to the monumental change that has just occurred. It also gives them time to plan the wedding of the century. The capital city is abuzz with preparations. Every household hangs lanterns and banners. The royal kitchens are a scene of frantic activity, as cooks prepare for a feast that will feed thousands. Huge vats of rice wine are brought out from the storehouses, and the finest livestock are chosen for the celebration. For the people of Gaia, this isn't just about their king getting married. It's a celebration of their kingdom's divine legitimacy, a collective sigh of relief that the prophecy came true, and frankly, a fantastic excuse for a multi-day party. On the day of the wedding, you are there in the grand ceremonial courtyard of the main palace. The air is thick with the scent of pine incense and roasting meat. The Gaia court is assembled, a sea of officials in their stiff formal robes and soldiers in their gleaming iron armor. King Suro stands waiting, looking every bit the divine king, his youth tempered by a clear sense of command. Then, she appears. Heo Huang Ok makes her entrance and a hush falls over the crowd. She is dressed in a gown of brilliant crimson silk from her homeland, a color symbolizing joy and good fortune. Gold and jade ornaments are woven into her dark hair, and her jewelry glitters in the sun. She looks not like a foreign visitor, but like a celestial being who has descended to Earth. The ceremony itself is a beautiful fusion of two worlds. There are the local Gaia rituals. A shaman chants a blessing, beating a steady rhythm on a large drum to honor the spirits of the land. Offerings of grain and wine are made to Suro's divine ancestors. It's earthy, powerful, and deeply rooted in the soil of the peninsula. Then the princess introduces her own traditions. She and Suro exchange garlands of flowers, a custom that feels gentle and personal amidst the loud pronouncements of the court. Her own attendants chant a prayer in their native tongue, a melodic foreign sound that captivates the audience. It's a wedding, but it's also a masterclass in cultural diplomacy, each side honoring the traditions of the other. The mainstream historical fact is that a royal wedding like this was a critical piece of statecraft. It wasn't just for the couple, it was for the public. Following the ceremony, King Suro hosts a massive feast. The palace gates are thrown open, and food and drink are distributed freely to the common people. This act of largesse is a way for the king to display his wealth and generosity, solidifying the loyalty of his subjects. It transforms the marriage from a private contract into a shared public joy, binding the people to their new queen through a shared celebration. Later that evening, in the privacy of their chambers, the Samguk Yusa gives us a final, wonderfully formal, quirky tidbit. Before consummating the marriage, the king and new queen have one last piece of business. Suro turns to her and says, formally, "I was born with a divine destiny, but I had not found a partner, and I have waited for you." Heo Huang Ok replies with equal gravity, "My parents were commanded by the sky god in a dream to send me to you." It's an almost comical final checking of the celestial paperwork, a confirmation that this union is a cosmic business merger, approved by the highest authority. It's the ancient equivalent of both people saying, "Just to be clear, the universe's text message said to meet you here, right?" Before the first kiss. This formal establishment of their joint divine right is crucial, but her arrival brought more than just political stability. The symbols and rituals she introduced were completely new. Historians still argue whether Heo Huang Ok's arrival and the traditions of her entourage marked the very first informal introduction of proto-Buddhist or Hindu philosophies to the Korean peninsula. While the official adoption of Buddhism as a state religion was still centuries away, it's entirely possible that her personal faith, the icons she brought, like the Pasa stone pagoda, and her worldview, planted the first subtle seeds of Indian spiritual thought in Gaia society, a quiet cultural influence that predates the official historical record. As the noise of the city-wide celebration begins to fade and the bonfires burn down to glowing embers, you can imagine the new queen in her chambers. She has done it. She has navigated court politics, asserted her own authority, and is now, officially, the queen of Gyeomgwan Gaia. Her position is secure. Her future, and the future of this kingdom, is now intertwined with that of the king. The whirlwind is over. The frantic journey, the tense first meetings, the grand wedding, it's all done. Now, the long, quiet, and infinitely more difficult work of building a life, a partnership, and a dynasty in this strange new land truly begins. The morning after the wedding dawns not with trumpets and cheers, but with the quiet, mundane sounds of a city getting back to work. The street sweepers are clearing away the remnants of the feast, the merchants are setting up their stalls, and the blacksmith's hammers begin their familiar rhythmic ringing. The party is over, and for the new queen, Heo Huang Ok, the real work is just beginning. Her new life isn't going to be an endless series of grand ceremonies. It's going to be a day-by-day process of navigating a completely alien culture from the very pinnacle of its society. You are with her in these first few months, and you see the immense challenges she faces. The most immediate is the language. While she has translators for official business, the small, intimate conversations that build relationships are impossible. She is surrounded by the constant chatter of a language she doesn't understand, a deeply isolating experience. The food is different, less spicy, with unfamiliar ingredients. The social etiquette is a minefield of potential missteps. Even the climate is a shock. The damp Korean winters a far cry from the balmy heat of Ayutthaya. Every single day is a test of her adaptability and resilience. Then there are the palace politics. The court is filled with powerful clan leaders and their families. These are the people whose daughters King Suro passed over in favor of her. They are polite to her face, of course. She is the queen. But you can feel their watchful eyes. They are waiting for her to stumble, to prove she is just an exotic foreigner who doesn't understand their ways. A single arrogant command or a culturally insensitive remark could alienate them permanently. She knows she is walking a tightrope, and the entire future of her dynasty depends on her not falling. Faced with these challenges, she does not try to assert her authority through force. She doesn't issue decrees or demand changes. Instead, her approach is one of quiet, patient, and incredibly intelligent soft power. You watch as she spends her days learning. She doesn't stay cloistered in her palace. Accompanied by her ladies-in-waiting and a translator, she walks through the city. She observes the potters at their wheels, the weavers at their looms, and the blacksmiths shaping the glowing iron that is the source of her kingdom's strength. She listens to the stories of the common people. She is gathering data, learning the heart of her new home not from scrolls or official reports, but from the people themselves. Her influence begins to spread not through commands, but through gentle introduction. The mainstream historical fact is that the royal household was the single biggest driver of cultural trends and economic demand in any ancient kingdom. The queen's patronage could make a craftsman's career. Heo Huang-ok begins to request pottery with finer, more delicate designs. She asks the royal smiths to create jewelry with more intricate patterns, inspired by the pieces she brought with her. She doesn't command them to change. She simply creates a demand for a higher level of artistry. The artisans, eager for royal favor, rise to the challenge, innovating and refining their techniques. Her taste subtly elevates the quality of the very goods Gaia is famous for. One of her most significant introductions, according to some local legends, is a simple, calming ritual. This is a lovely, quirky, or fringe tidbit. It's believed she may have brought the first tea seeds or bushes to Korea. You are in the palace one afternoon. A group of noble ladies, the wives and daughters of the powerful clan chiefs, are visiting the queen. They are expecting the usual formal audience. Instead, Heo Huang-ok has her servants bring out a set of delicate porcelain cups and a pot of steaming, fragrant liquid. It's tea. She shows them how to hold the warm cups, how to inhale the aroma before sipping. For a culture accustomed to the potent kick of rice wine, this quiet, meditative ritual is a revelation. It's a moment of peace and civilized conversation. Soon, taking tea with the queen becomes the most sought-after invitation in the capital, a symbol of culture and refinement. It's a small thing, a cup of tea, but it's a powerful tool for building bridges. It is hard to plot against someone who just introduced you to the concept of a relaxing tea break. But was her influence purely cultural? Historians still argue whether a royal consort like Queen Heo would have had any direct say in matters of state, such as economic policy or diplomacy, or if her power was strictly confined to the domestic and cultural spheres. The historical records written by and for men tend to focus on the king's deeds, leaving the queen's role in the shadows. But it is hard to believe that a woman of her obvious intelligence and unique global perspective Wouldn't it have been a trusted advisor to her husband in private? You see their partnership growing. In the evenings, away from the prying eyes of the court, they talk. She tells him of Ayutthaya, of its vast temples, its complex philosophies, its sprawling trade networks that reach all the way to the Western Ocean. She gives him a vision of the world that is infinitely larger than he ever imagined. In return, he teaches her his language, explains the intricate web of loyalties that holds his kingdom together, and shares with her his dreams for their future. They are not just king and queen, they are partners, building a shared understanding. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the court begins to change. The nobles who were once suspicious now seek her counsel on matters of art and etiquette. The palace, under her influence, becomes not just a center of power but a center of culture. She has not shouted for their respect. She has earned it with her wisdom, her grace, and her seemingly endless supply of delicious, exotic tea. The foundations of her reign are now set, not in the stone of command, but in the fertile soil of quiet, persistent influence. While the new queen's influence spreads subtly through the court like the aroma of freshly brewed tea, one piece of her homeland stands apart. It doesn't assimilate or blend in. It is a loud, stony, and utterly baffling testament to her origins, a permanent exclamation point on her arrival story. Let's leave the quiet, politically charged atmosphere of the palace for a moment and go to the courtyard where it sits. You are going to look at the Pasa stone pagoda. Don't picture a towering, multi-tiered structure. The reality is much more intimate and somehow more mysterious. What you see is a small, weathered stone carving standing about 5 feet tall. It's rough-hewn, its edges softened by 20 centuries of wind and rain. The carvings that once adorned its surface are now faint ghosts of their former selves, but you can just make out patterns that are distinctly non-Korean in their style. The stone itself is the strangest part. It's a pale, sandy color but shot through with reddish-brown flecks, and veins giving it a mottled appearance that some have compared to chicken blood. It looks ancient, alien, and deeply out of place. In these early days of her reign, the pagoda is housed within the palace grounds. It is not just a curiosity, it is a sacred relic, the central icon of the new royal family's founding myth. It is the physical proof that the gods not only sent King Suru in an egg, but also sent his queen with her own divine luggage. You can imagine the court officials walking past it with a mixture of awe and suspicion. It's the object that supposedly tamed the sea, the tangible link to the divine forces that sanctioned this new dynasty. For Heo Hwang-ok, it must be a profound source of comfort, a solid piece of her past, a silent, stony confidant in a world of unfamiliar faces and whispered words. For centuries, the pagoda's story was just that, a story. But in the modern era, scientists have been able to examine the stone, and what they found is astonishing. The mainstream historical fact, confirmed by geological analysis, is that this rock is not from Korea. Its specific composition, a quartz-rich sedimentary stone, does not match any known geology on the entire Korean peninsula. The legend, at least on this crucial point, is true. She really did bring it from somewhere else. This is where the story tips from enchanting myth into a genuine historical puzzle. And here's the quirky tidbit that makes it so fascinating. While geologists have confirmed it's foreign, they can't definitively pinpoint its origin. The rock shares characteristics with stone found in the Himalayan foothills of India, parts of Thailand, and along the Yangtze River in China, all places that are candidates for the location of Ayutthaya. The stone holds the secret of its origin, but it refuses to give a clear answer. It's a 2,000-year-old geological cold case. Even its name, Pasa Stone Pagoda, or Pasa Seoktap, is a clue. Historians still argue whether the name Pasa is a phonetic rendering of a Sanskrit word, possibly Pashana, meaning stone, or if it's a transliteration of a specific place. For example, some have linked it to the Persian Empire, which had trade links with India. The name itself is a linguistic breadcrumb, a fossilized word from a foreign tongue that hints at a much wider, interconnected world. The debate over the stone's origin, is it a Buddhist stupa from India, a Hindu shrine, or a Taoist artifact from China, is as heated and unresolved as the debate over the Queen's own homeland. Over the centuries, The pagoda's reputation grew. It wasn't just the thing that calmed the seas for the queen. Local legends attributed all sorts of magical properties to it. It was said to have healing powers, or that a piece of it could make plants grow. It became a kind of catch-all magical object for the region. You can almost imagine the palace servants blaming it for minor mishaps. "The soup is cold again. I swear it's the strange vibes coming off that foreign rock." Amazingly, this small, strange stone has survived. While palaces have burned, dynasties have fallen, and entire cities have been reduced to rubble by invasions, the Pasa Stone Pagoda has endured. It was eventually moved from the palace to a temple built in the queen's honor, and later moved again to its current location, in a protective pavilion near the royal tombs of King Suro and Queen Heo. It is a silent witness to the entire sweep of Korean history. It was there when the Gaya Confederacy eventually fell to its rival, Silla. It was there when Mongol hordes swept across the land. It was there through centuries of quiet scholarly life and brutal modern wars. Today you can go and see it. It is the most tangible, durable piece of Queen Heo's legacy. Her other introductions, ideas, customs, even her bloodline, have been absorbed and integrated, becoming part of the fabric of Korea. But the stone remains stubbornly, unchangeably foreign. It is a perfect, enduring symbol of the queen herself. A powerful, mysterious, and transformative force from another world, whose true origins remain one of history's most captivating puzzles. The Pasa Stone provided a foundation of myth for the new kingdom, a solid, tangible link to the divine. But a dynasty cannot be built on stone alone. It requires a foundation of flesh and blood. And in this, her most crucial and nerve-wracking duty as a queen, Heo Hwang-ok would prove to be not just successful, but astonishingly, legendarily prolific. Once the wedding celebrations were over and the routine of court life set in, you can feel the entire kingdom holding its collective breath. The foreign queen was beautiful, wise, and divinely sent, but the question on everyone's mind was simple: could she produce an heir? In the ancient world, a queen's primary political function was her fertility. An empty throne was an invitation for civil war and foreign invasion. An heir, specifically a male heir, was the kingdom's ultimate insurance policy. You can imagine the immense pressure on the young queen. Every month that passed would have been filled with whispered speculation and the anxious prayers of the court. But the waiting, as it turned out, was not long. Within a year or so of her arrival, the palace bells ring out with joyous news. The queen has given birth to a son. He is named Gyeodong, and his first cry is the sound of a dynasty secured. The city erupts in celebration. The foreign queen has now become the mother of a native-born prince. Her roots in the soil of Gaia are now as deep and permanent as any of the ancient clans. Her position is unassailable. And then she does it again. And again. And again. This is where her story moves from impressive to almost superhuman. The Samguk Yusa chronicles that over the course of her marriage, Queen Heo gave birth to 10 sons. 10. Let that number sink in. In an era of high infant mortality, where even wealthy families were lucky if half their children survived to adulthood, producing 10 healthy sons who all grew to maturity was seen as nothing less than a miracle. It was the ultimate divine endorsement of her union with Suro. You can picture the palace transforming over the years. The quiet formal halls that once echoed with the careful footsteps of courtiers are now filled with the noise and chaos of a growing brood of princes. The challenge of crossing the ocean probably seemed like a relaxing spa day compared to raising 10 boys, even with a legion of royal nannies. This incredible fecundity was more than a personal achievement. It was a geopolitical masterstroke. The mainstream historical fact is that the Korean peninsula during this period was a volatile checkerboard of competing powers. The great kingdoms of Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla were beginning their centuries-long struggle for dominance. Smaller states and confederacies like Gaia survived on a knife's edge. Their greatest vulnerability was internal division. A succession crisis with multiple factions backing different claimants to the throne would have been a death sentence, an open invitation for a stronger neighbor to march in and restore order. By producing an heir and 9 spares, Queen Heo gave Gaia its single greatest strategic asset: absolute, unquestionable stability. There would be no fight for the throne. They had a waiting list. Interestingly, the official record might not even tell the whole story. While the famous Samguk Yusa lists 10 sons, another, less cited text called the Garaguk Gi provides a fascinating quirky tidbit. It claims that Suro and Heo had 12 children, 10 sons and 2 daughters. So where did the princesses go? Why were they written out of the more popular history? It's a poignant reminder of the deeply patriarchal lens through which these chronicles were written. A son was a future king or lord, a vital piece on the political chessboard. A daughter, while useful for forging marriage alliances, was not part of the direct line of succession, and was therefore to the male chroniclers less important. The story of these 2 forgotten princesses adds a layer of quiet tragedy to the Queen's otherwise triumphant tale of motherhood. Of course, we have to ask, was it literally 10 sons? Historians still argue whether the number 10 in the chronicle should be taken as a precise headcount, or if it was used symbolically. In many ancient cultures, 10 is a number representing completion, perfection, and fulfillment. So, was the chronicler saying she had exactly 10 sons? Or was 10 sons a kind of literary shorthand for she had a great many children and fulfilled her royal duty perfectly, securing the dynasty for all time? It's impossible to know for sure, but the political impact was the same regardless. With each birth, the queen's power grew and transformed. She was no longer simply the king's consort, a respected but ultimately dependent figure. She was now the matriarch, the mother of the entire future ruling class of the kingdom. Her sons were the kingdom's future. Their marriages would be the most important political events of the next generation, and she, as their mother, would have a powerful say in who they married. The very clans whose daughters were once her rivals now vied for the honor of having their own daughters marry one of her sons. She had gone from being an outsider navigating a complex web of family ties to the weaver of that web herself. Her influence was no longer just soft power, it was the fundamental power of creation and legacy. She was, in the most literal sense, the mother of her nation. The 10 princes grow into strong young men, the pride and security of the kingdom. You see them training with swords in the palace courtyard, their iron armor clanging. You see them studying the classics and learning the arts of governance. They are the future of Gyeomgwangaya, the 10 pillars of the royal Kim clan, named for their father, King Suro. Their lineage is set, their destiny assured, but the queen, now a confident and deeply respected matriarch in her middle years, has one more deeply personal piece of her legacy to secure. Her work is not quite done. You are in the private chambers of the palace. The king and queen are together, looking out over the capital city they have built. The raw energy of its founding years has settled into a stable, prosperous rhythm. In this quiet moment, the queen turns to her husband and speaks of a sadness that has been weighing on her. She reminds him of her journey, of how she left her parents and her homeland behind to fulfill a divine command. She has given him her life, her love, and 10 sons. Yet she says her own name, her ancestral identity, is destined to vanish from this land. Her surname, Heo, brought from so far away, will be a forgotten footnote once her sons and their children are all known as Kim. It's a poignant lament. She is the mother of a nation, yet her own lineage faces extinction. Then she makes her request, a proposal so radical, so contrary to the traditions of this time and place, that it must have hung in the air like a thunderclap. She asks King Suro to allow 2 of their 10 sons to take her surname, Heo, not as a nickname or an honorific, but as their official family name. She is asking him to cleave his own dynasty in 2, to create a new noble line that will trace its identity not through him, the divine king, but through her, the foreign queen. To understand how revolutionary this was, you need to grasp a core mainstream historical fact of this era. Society was strictly and uncompromisingly patrilineal. Lineage, identity, property, and titles were all passed down through the father's line. A woman, upon marriage, was essentially absorbed into her husband's clan. Her children belonged to him and his ancestors. For a child to take its mother's surname was almost unthinkable. For a king to willingly grant this privilege, thereby seeming to diminish his own patriarchal authority, was simply unheard of. It would be like suggesting to a medieval European king that a couple of the princes should use the queen's maiden name to start their own rival dynasty. It just wasn't done. A lesser king, a more insecure man, would have been deeply insulted. He might have seen it as a direct challenge to his authority, a questioning of the very foundation of their society. But the legend of King Suro has always depicted him as a man of extraordinary wisdom, and his partnership with Heo Huang Ok as one of genuine equals. He looks at his wife, the woman who crossed the world for him, who gave him a stable kingdom and a loving family, and he understands the depth of her request. He sees it not as a challenge, but as a matter of fairness, of love. And so, in an act of incredible grace and partnership, he agrees. He grants her wish. And so, two of the princes are chosen. The quirky tidbit from the chronicles is that their eldest son, Godong, would of course remain a Kim to inherit the throne. And the other 7 princes apparently followed their elder brother's example. But 2 were set aside to honor their mother. They would be known to history as Heo Gudo and Heo Myong, the founding ancestors of the Gimhae Heo clan. The king himself gives them this new identity, a gift of love from a father to a mother and her sons. Naturally, an event this strange and significant invites skepticism. Historians still argue whether this quiet conversation between king and queen actually happened as described, or if the story is a foundational myth created centuries later. Powerful clans in Korean history often sought to legitimize their status by crafting impressive origin stories that connected them to ancient royalty. It is possible that the Heo clan, having risen to prominence, created this story to explain their unusual name and grant themselves a direct royally approved link to the founding mother of the kingdom. Whether it happened in the 2nd century or was invented in the 8th, the story's purpose is the same: to honor the legacy of Queen Heo. The impact of this decision, real or mythologized, is immense. It is the ultimate testament to Queen Heo's power and influence. She was not erased by her marriage. She did not simply become a vessel for the Kim dynasty. She successfully negotiated the continuation of her own lineage, creating a parallel noble house that would flourish for 2,000 years. It is her most radical, most personal, and most enduring political act. You can imagine her in the aftermath of this decision, watching her 2 Heo sons. They are a living testament to her identity. The Pasa stone was a mysterious, inanimate piece of her past. These boys are a living, breathing piece of her heritage, carrying her name into the future of a land that was once foreign to her. She has won a quiet victory, not of swords, but of identity. A part of Ayutthaya, the distant kingdom she left so long ago, will now be woven into the fabric of Korea forever. The queen has now secured her family's name, planting a seed of her personal heritage that will grow for millennia. But her influence extends far beyond the palace walls and the complexities of family lineage. She didn't just bring a new bloodline to Gaia. She brought a mental map of the world, and with it the promise of immense wealth. Her impact is about to transform the kingdom from a regional power into a cosmopolitan hub of international commerce. Remember, Gaia's strength is iron. Their forges produce some of the highest quality metal in East Asia. They have the hardware of a successful economy. But having a great product is only half the battle. You need customers. Before the queen's arrival, Gaia's trade was robust but limited. The mainstream historical fact is that the Gaia Confederacy was a crucial intermediary in the trade networks of its time, primarily shipping its valuable iron eastward to the various kingdoms of Wa, ancient Japan, and northward to the Chinese commanderies. It was a profitable but relatively contained circuit. They were a big fish in a small pond. Queen Heo, having arrived from a civilization at the heart of the sprawling maritime Silk Road, understood that their pond was connected to a vast global ocean of commerce. She and her entourage brought the software, the knowledge, connections, and cultural understanding needed to plug Gaia into this global network. You can imagine her in the council rooms with King Suro and his ministers. They talk of local rivals and harvests. She speaks of distant ports where merchants trade Roman glass for Chinese silk, and where Indian spices are worth more than their weight in gold. To the Gaia court, these must have sounded like fantastical fables. To her, it was simply the family business. She knew the routes, the currents, the valuable goods, and the unwritten rules of long-distance trade. Her influence catalyzes a shift in Gaia's economic focus. You are standing now in the main port city of Gyumguan, Gaia, a place that is rapidly transforming. Where there were once only local fishing boats and the occasional stout coastal trader, you now see larger, more sophisticated vessels. Chinese junks with their distinctive battened sails are moored next to ships that look suspiciously like the one the Queen arrived in, their crews speaking languages from Southeast Asia. The marketplace is a chaotic, vibrant symphony of commerce. The air smells of salt, fish, and pine, but now it's mixed with the exotic scents of sandalwood and cloves. You hear the harsh clang of Gaia's iron ingots being loaded onto a ship, while nearby merchants haggle over shimmering bolts of silk and delicate glazed ceramics from China. Among the treasures being traded, you notice small, curved beads of polished jade. These are gogok, highly prized symbols of spiritual and political power worn by the elites of Gaia and Japan. The quirky tidbit is that while many of these comma-shaped beads were made from local stone, the most valuable ones were crafted from jade imported from sources hundreds, if not thousands of miles away. These beautiful little objects are tangible proof of the expanding trade network, small pieces of a distant continent brought to Gaia's shores, along the very routes the Queen's knowledge helped to open. Of course, it's unlikely the Queen was personally drawing up trade agreements or negotiating shipping rates. She was probably not the ancient equivalent of a CEO. Historians still argue whether her role in this economic expansion was one of active direction, where she and her officials consciously guided Gaia's merchants toward new markets, or if her influence was more of a passive catalyst. Her very presence, the sheer fact of her impossible journey and the sophisticated goods she brought, would have been a powerful inspiration for local traders, a living advertisement for the riches that lay beyond the southern horizon. She may not have drawn the map, but she was the one who proved the destination was real. This explosion in trade brings a new level of prosperity and sophistication to the kingdom. The wealth pouring into the royal coffers allows Suro to fund a larger, better-equipped army, making Gaia more secure from its aggressive neighbors. It also funds the construction of more impressive palaces, tombs, and temples, symbols of the kingdom's power. But the most valuable imports aren't the silks or spices. They're the ideas. The foreign merchants bring news, information, and new ways of thinking. The port becomes the kingdom's ear to the world, giving the king an invaluable stream of intelligence about his rivals and allies. Trying to manage the influx of foreign sailors and their questionable hygiene must have been a logistical nightmare for the local officials, but the benefits were undeniable. You see the Queen herself walking through the bustling market, her presence a royal endorsement of this new globalized economy. She examines a bolt of silk, her fingers recognizing the weave of her homeland, or speaks through a translator to a merchant whose accent reminds her of a port she once visited on her long journey here. She is a living bridge between two worlds, and under her quiet guidance she is making her new home, the small kingdom of iron, an essential and glittering link in the grand chain of global commerce. A Gaia ship, laden with the kingdom's wealth, hoists its sails. But this time it's not turning east to Japan or north to China. It's pointing south out toward the vast open ocean, the world from which their queen had come. That ship sailing south is a potent symbol of the kingdom's new global reach. But what does all this prosperity, this grand geopolitical maneuvering, actually mean for the average person? A thriving international trade network doesn't put food on the table. Or does it? Let's step away from the palace and the port and walk through the dusty streets of the capital to see how life is actually lived in the Iron Kingdom. The first thing you notice is the sound. It's the city's constant, thrumming heartbeat, the rhythmic clang, clang, clang of hammers on iron. It rises from dozens of forges scattered throughout the city, a percussive soundtrack to daily life. It is the sound of Gaia's wealth being beaten into existence. You peer into the open front of a smithy. The air is blisteringly hot and thick with the smell of coal smoke and hot metal. A master blacksmith, his body lean and corded with muscle, pulls a glowing orange lump of iron from the forge. His apprentice works the bellows, pumping life into the fire. With a practiced, almost surgical precision, the master begins to hammer the bloom, sparks flying like angry fireflies. He is not just a laborer, he is an artist, a respected and essential member of this society. a kind of magician who transforms raw earth into the tools of life and death. You move on past the smithies toward the city walls. Outside, in the fertile plains of the Nakdong River Delta, farmers are at work. Their backs are bent as they tend to the paddies of rice that feed the growing population. Their most prized possessions are their tools, the iron-tipped plows, sickles, and hoes that came from the forges you just left. This is the symbiotic relationship at the heart of Gaia. The forge provides the tools that make the land more productive, and the productive land feeds the artisans who work the forges. Back within the city's protective wooden palisades, you find the potter's quarter. Here the air is cooler and smells of damp clay. A craftsman sits at a low wheel, his hands deftly shaping a lump of gray clay into a graceful, long-necked jar. All around his workshop are finished pieces, the distinctive gray stoneware for which Gaia is famous. There are practical storage jars and elegant wine ewers, but your eye is drawn to the whimsical, duck-shaped vessels, waiting to be filled with offerings and placed in a tomb to guide a soul to the afterlife. It's a quiet, creative corner of the city, a counterpoint to the fierce energy of the forges, a crucial window into the life and afterlife of the Gaia elite comes from their tombs. The mainstream historical fact is that the ruling class were buried in impressive fashion, in wooden chambers dug into the earth and then covered with a large mound, or tumulus. Modern archaeologists have excavated these tombs and found them packed with the treasures of their society. Hundreds of pottery vessels, bronze mirrors, gold jewelry, and above all, astonishing quantities of iron. Full suits of armor, helmets, swords, spears, and arrowheads were interred with the dead, equipping them for any battles they might face in the next world. These tombs are a stark illustration of their power, their wealth, and their deep belief in a tangible afterlife. But what about the common folk? Their story is told in a much more humble and frankly smellier archaeological feature, shell mounds. This quirky tidbit of Gaia archaeology is a historian's dream. These mounds are, essentially, ancient landfill sites, massive piles of discarded seashells accumulated over generations. They are the leftovers from countless family dinners. Buried within these mountains of ancient garbage, archaeologists find the broken pottery of daily life, discarded tools, animal bones, and other detritus. It's history written in trash, and it tells us more about the diet and daily habits of the average person than any royal tomb ever could. It makes you wonder what future archaeologists will think of us when they excavate our plastic-filled landfills. This archaeological split between glorious tombs and humble trash heaps raises a key question. Historians still argue whether Gaia society was a rigid, hierarchical system with very little social mobility, or if there was a path for advancement. Could a particularly skilled blacksmith or a clever merchant, through talent and hard work, accumulate enough wealth to blur the lines between commoner and aristocrat? The evidence is ambiguous, but the sheer value placed on their craftsmanship suggests that the artisans, at least, held a special and respected place in the social order. As dusk begins to fall, you get a real feel for the city. The hammers fall silent. The farmers and their oxen trudge back through the gates. The smell of wood smoke and cooking fires, of grilling fish and steaming rice, fills the air. Children, their chores done, play a final, boisterous game in the street. You can feel the presence of the queen everywhere, even here. The stability that allows for this peaceful daily routine is a direct result of her marriage. The small luxuries in the market, the sense of connection to a wider world, these are her legacy. She and King Suro haven't just created a dynasty. They have built a functioning, prosperous community. This is the true measure of their reign. The peaceful twilight you witness settles over the kingdom not just for a night but for a lifetime. The years spool by, turning into decades. The small capital you first saw grows into a bustling, confident metropolis. The kingdom, secured by a stable dynasty and enriched by global trade, prospers. The 10 princes grow into men, taking their places as leaders and lords. And at the heart of it all, King Suro and Queen Heohuang Oke grow old together. And in the queen's case, according to the legend, very, very old. The Samguk Yusa, the medieval chronicle that is our primary source for her life, makes a truly staggering claim. It states that Queen Hehuang died in the year 189 AD at the age of 157. Her husband, King Suro, is said to have lived to be 158. Now let's be honest, this immediately sets off our modern alarms for historical exaggeration. 157. It's an age that would be a medical marvel today. In the 2nd century AD, it was pure myth. The average life expectancy for even the privileged elite was likely less than half that. Clearly her skincare routine was legendary, but probably not that legendary. This incredible number is a major point of contention for historians. Historians still argue whether these fantastic lifespans should be seen as a complete fabrication designed to deify the kingdom's founders, a symbolic representation of their long and stable reign, or perhaps the result of a clerical error or mistranslation in the centuries between their lives and the recording of their story. Could a character in an ancient text have been misinterpreted? Or was it simply the chronicler's most effective way of saying, their reign was a golden age that felt like it lasted forever? But for a moment, let's suspend our disbelief. Let us take the legend at its word and contemplate what it would actually mean to live for 157 years in that era. Imagine the sheer, overwhelming scope of history she would have witnessed. When she was a young girl in Ayuta, Tiberius was the emperor of Rome. When she died, the Roman Empire had passed through its golden age under emperors like Trajan and Hadrian, and was beginning its long, slow decline under the disastrous reign of Commodus. She would have lived long enough to hear traitors' tales of the construction of both the Colosseum and Hadrian's Wall. That's the mainstream historical fact to put in your pocket. Her single, legendary lifetime spans the absolute peak and the beginning of the end for the Roman Empire. Closer to home, she would have seen the mighty Eastern Han dynasty of China, a flourishing superpower when she began her journey, descend into chaos. Just 5 years before her death in 189, the devastating Yellow Turban Rebellion erupted across China, a peasant uprising that would fatally wound the Han and usher in the famous Three Kingdoms period. The world she died in was a radically different, far more chaotic place than the one she was born into. And she was there for all of it, a fixed point in a century and a half of tumultuous change. Within her own kingdom, the changes would have been even more profound. She would have watched her own sons grow from noisy boys into gray-haired men. She would have seen her eldest son, Geodyung, take the throne and rule as the second king of Gaia. She would have held her great-grandchildren in her arms. She would have become a living ancestor, a figure of pure myth within her own lifetime. The stories of her arrival from a distant land would have been told to her great-great-grandchildren, not as ancient history, but as a personal anecdote. And hey, remember that quirky tidbit about the peaches she brought with her, the mythological fruit of immortality? Given her legendary age, you have to wonder if maybe she kept a secret stash for herself. Of course, there is a profound sadness to such a long life. She would have outlived almost everyone she ever knew and loved. She would have stood at the graveside of her husband. She would have mourned the passing of most, if not all, of her own children. It is the curse of the immortal, to watch the world you love turn to dust around you. She would have become a monument, a revered and sacred object much like her Pasa stone pagoda, while the vibrant, living court she had built faded into memory. In her final decades, you see her not as the active queen, but as the great queen mother, the ultimate elder stateswoman. The day-to-day running of the kingdom is in the hands of her descendants. Her role is now one of pure wisdom. She is the keeper of the nation's institutional memory because it is, quite literally, her memory. When a crisis arose, her son the king could come to her and ask, "Mother, we faced a similar drought 80 years ago. What did my grandfather do?" Her perspective wasn't just historical, it was personal. So whether she lived to 157 or a more human 75, the legend of her age tells a poetic truth. Her impact was so foundational, her presence so stabilizing, that it felt to subsequent generations as though she had been there for an eternity. The number isn't about biology. It's about legacy. Her long life is a metaphor for the long peace and prosperity that her union with King Suro brought to the Iron Kingdom. The legend of her age is a powerful testament to her impact. But whether she lived to a human 75 or a mythical 157, every life, even one touched by the gods, must eventually come to an end. You are with her now in the twilight of her reign, in the final years as the great Queen Mother begins to make her last arrangements. The fire of her youth has softened to a steady, warm glow of wisdom, and her primary concern is no longer building a kingdom, but ensuring its permanence. Her residence within the palace complex is a quiet haven of living history. It's no longer the center of political power that has moved to the court of her son, the reigning king, but it is the undisputed center of the kingdom's soul. Young princes and princesses are sent to her chambers to learn the story of their family, not from a dry scroll, but from the woman who lived it. She is the keeper of the flame, the final, first-hand witness to the kingdom's miraculous birth. You watch as she advises her ruling son, King Godung, his own hair now streaked with gray. She speaks to him of the past, reminding him of long-forgotten alliances and the lessons learned from decades-old disputes. Her counsel is an anchor of stability, her long memory a strategic resource that no other kingdom possesses. Her main focus, however, is on the future, a future she will not see. She spends her last years meticulously weaving the web of kinship that will hold the kingdom together after she is gone. You see her acting as the ultimate royal matchmaker, arranging the marriages of her many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. A grandson from the royal Kim line is married to the daughter of a powerful clan chief in the east. A granddaughter from her own Heo line is wed to the heir of a lord in the west. Each marriage is a carefully chosen thread, tying the disparate parts of the confederacy to the royal center, binding them with the unbreakable bonds of family. She is inoculating the kingdom against future civil war. She is also deeply concerned with the legacy of her own 10 sons. The Samguk Yusa provides a fascinating, quirky tidbit about their fates, one that speaks volumes about her enduring cultural influence. According to the chronicle, her eldest son, Geodung, inherited the throne. 2 sons, as you know, carried on her Heo surname. But 7 of the remaining sons, the legend claims, chose not to pursue worldly power. They chose a spiritual path, becoming Buddhist monks under the tutelage of her own brother, who had become a great monk named Zhang Yu. This is an extraordinary detail. The mainstream historical fact is that Buddhism didn't become an official state religion in the Gaia region for another 2 or 3 centuries. Yet here is the founding queen in her final years, guiding the majority of her sons toward a faith from her homeland. This, of course, is a point of intense scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the story of the 7 princes becoming monks is a literal truth, suggesting a very early, royally sponsored pocket of Buddhism in Korea, or if it's a retroactive story created by later Buddhist monks. By claiming the founding princes as their spiritual ancestors, they could give their religion an impeccable royal pedigree, whether she was a true patron of a new faith or simply a convenient figure for a later narrative. The story powerfully associates her with the introduction of new spiritual ideas. Imagine one of her last family gatherings. Her surviving sons, now old men themselves, are before her. To the princes of the Kim line, she speaks of duty, unity, and the heavy burden of the crown. To her sons of the Heo line, she entrusts the memory of Ayuda, the preservation of her story, and the spiritual well-being of the family. She is not just saying goodbye, she is giving her final orders, ensuring every piece of her complex legacy has a designated guardian. She's even overseeing the initial plans for her own tomb, making sure it will lie beside her husband's, a final, eternal statement of their partnership. She is, to the very end, a queen, managing, arranging, and securing the future. You have to admire the focus. She's micromanaging her own legacy from beyond the grave. Then, one day in the year 189 AD, the end comes. It is, as the chronicles describe it, a peaceful passing. She has lived an impossibly long and full life. She has seen her small, vulnerable kingdom grow into a stable and prosperous nation. Her work is done. The news of her death spreads like a ripple across a still pond. In the capital, the ever-present clang of the forges falls silent as the blacksmiths lay down their hammers in tribute. In the bustling port, the sailors lower their crimson and ochre sails. A profound quiet settles over the land. The kingdom mourns not just a ruler, but its founding mother, its living connection to its divine origins. The girl who arrived on a red-sailed ship, who filled a kingdom with life, commerce, and wisdom, is gone. But the arrangements she so carefully made ensure that the house she built will stand strong for centuries to come. The silence that fell over the kingdom is not one of emptiness, but of deep shared reverence. A life that spanned generations has ended, and now it must be honored. The royal court, working with the quiet efficiency the queen herself had instilled, begins to prepare for the grandest state funeral the nation has ever known. This is not just a burial. It is the final chapter of a foundational myth, and it must be done with all the solemnity and splendor the kingdom can muster. You stand among the silent, grieving crowds that line the main thoroughfare of the capital. The air is heavy with the scent of burning incense and the sound of slow, mournful drumming. The procession is a river of sorrow and majesty. At its head are shaman priests, chanting prayers to guide the queen's spirit on its final journey. They are followed by soldiers in full iron armor, their spears pointing downwards in a sign of respect. Then comes the royal family. Her sons, her grandchildren, their faces etched with a very real human grief that transcends their royal status. Finally, her coffin, draped in the finest crimson silk, is carried on the shoulders of the highest-ranking nobles of the land. The woman who arrived with such startling suddenness from the sea now makes her final, slow, and deliberate passage through the heart of her kingdom. The procession ends at the foot of a gentle hill just outside the capital, a place designated as the royal burial ground. And it is here that you can travel today, to the city of Gimhae in modern South Korea, to see where she rests. You stand in a quiet, beautifully manicured park. Before you are two large, perfectly rounded earthen mounds, covered in a thick carpet of green grass. They rise from the flat ground like two sleeping green hills. It is a place of profound peace. One mound is the tomb of King Suro, and right beside it, and equal in size, in stature, and in honor, is the tomb of Queen Heo Hwang Ok. This arrangement is, in itself, a powerful final statement. She is not buried in a lesser plot, or as a mere consort within her husband's tomb. She has her own monumental tomb, a mirror of his. They are a pair. It is the ultimate architectural expression of their partnership. They were co-founders, and so they rest for eternity as co-equals. This physical separation and equal status is a testament to the immense respect she commanded, a final acknowledgement that the Kim dynasty of Gaia was built on two pillars, not just one. Her tomb, like her husband's, has never been scientifically excavated. The desire to preserve the sanctity of the kingdom's founding monarchs has outweighed archaeological curiosity, but we have a very good idea of what it might look like inside. The mainstream historical fact is that dozens of other, slightly less important Gaia royal tombs have been excavated, and they reveal a consistent and spectacular burial culture. You can imagine a deep pit at the bottom of which is a large chamber constructed from thick timbers. Inside this chamber, the queen's body would have been laid to rest, surrounded by the treasures of her life. There would be hundreds of pottery vessels, a golden crown, intricate jewelry, and perhaps personal items like her bronze mirror or a lacquered comb. And nestled among these objects of her life in Gaia, you can be sure there would be mementos of her homeland. A small carved figurine, a piece of fabric, a single gemstone, a final secret connection to the world she left behind. Just outside the tombs, there is a small stone structure that bears a familiar, powerful symbol. It's the quirky tidbit that ties her entire story together. The twin fish, the emblem of Ayodhya, the mark of her distant home, is carved here at her final resting place. It is a permanent declaration of her origins, a final stamp of her unique identity on the landscape of her new home. It's her way of saying, even in death, I am of Gaia, but never forget where I came from. Of course, the pristine condition of the tombs today raises a question. Historians still argue whether these mounds have truly remained undisturbed for nearly 2 millennia. The Korean peninsula was ravaged by multiple invasions over the centuries, and tomb robbing was a common practice. Is it possible that these tombs were looted long ago, their treasures scattered, their secrets lost to time? Or did the reverence for these founding monarchs protect them? Without excavation, we can only speculate about the priceless history that may or may not lie beneath the quiet green grass. But the tombs are not dead relics. They are a living center of heritage. Every year, a grand memorial ceremony, a jisa, is held here. Thousands of people, all claiming direct descent from the Gimhae Kim and Gimhae Heo clans, gather to pay their respects. It's the biggest and arguably oldest family reunion on the planet. They bring offerings of food and wine and bow before the graves of their founding mother and father. It's a powerful testament to the fact that her legacy isn't just a historical tale. It's a vital part of the identity of millions of people alive today. Her journey ended here on this quiet hill, but her story has never stopped moving. That massive family reunion you see at the royal tombs isn't just a quaint tradition. It's a gathering of the shareholders in one of the most successful and enduring legacies in Korean history. To understand the true, long-term impact of Queen Haeo's life, an impact that echoes powerfully in the modern world, we need to follow the story of the name she fought so hard to preserve. Haeo. Remember her unprecedented request? The one that seemed so personal, so sentimental? Her desire for 2 of her 10 sons to carry her surname was an act of quiet, radical foresight. Those 2 sons, Haeo Gudo and Haeo Mayong, became the twin headwaters of a new river of lineage. They had children, who had children, and with each passing generation, the Haeo clan grew. What started as a tiny offshoot of the royal family, a concession from a loving husband, blossomed into a major aristocratic house in its own right, influential in the politics and culture of the later Gaia Confederacy. But what happened when the kingdom itself ceased to exist? This is often the point in history where a royal line is extinguished. The mainstream historical fact is that in the year 532 AD, nearly 4 centuries after the death of Queen Haeo, the Gyeomgwan Gaia kingdom was formally annexed by its powerful and ambitious eastern neighbor, the Silla kingdom. Silla was in the process of unifying the peninsula, and Gaia was one of the last holdouts. Yet Silla's rulers were shrewd. They knew that simply crushing a proud nobility could lead to centuries of resentment and rebellion. Instead, they often practiced a policy of assimilation, absorbing the conquered elite into their own hierarchical system. The royal Gimhae Kim clan and the noble Gimhae Heo clan were given a high rank within the Silla aristocracy, a status befitting their semi-divine origins. This brilliant political move ensured their survival. The kingdom was gone, but the family, and the queen's name, endured. And endure it has. You can fast forward through the centuries through the unified Silla period, the Goryeo dynasty, the Joseon dynasty, and all the way to the bustling, high-tech reality of modern Korea. Today, one of the most common surnames in Korea is Haeo, often romanized as Huh or Her. The largest of these clans, the Gimhae Heo, traces its ancestry in an unbroken line all the way back to those 2 sons. When you combine her descendants from the Heo clans with those from the Gimhae Kim clan, it is estimated that over 6 million living South Koreans, more than 10% of the entire population, are direct descendants of this one remarkable woman from a distant land. This incredible feat of record-keeping is made possible by a uniquely Korean cultural practice, the bongwan. This is a fascinating, quirky tidbit of Korean genealogy. Your bongwan is the ancestral seat of your clan, so 2 people named Haeo are not considered to be from the same family line unless they also share the same bongwan. The Gimhae Heo are distinct from, say, the Yangcheon Heo. This system has led to the creation of astonishingly detailed genealogy books called jokbo, which families have maintained for centuries. While a typical Westerner might be lucky to trace their family tree back a few hundred years, many Korean families can, through their jokbo, trace their lineage all the way back to the dawn of their history. It's through these records that millions can point to a page and say, "There, that's her. That's where we began." Of course, the further back you go, the hazier the records become. Historians still argue whether the earliest entries in these ancient jokbo are meticulously accurate historical documents, or if they are a blend of fact and legend, designed to connect the clan to a prestigious and often divine origin. The link from the present day back to the 15th or 16th century is often solid, but the link from the 16th century back to the 2nd century often relies on the very same medieval chronicles and myths we've been exploring. So is the connection literal or legendary? For the families themselves, the distinction hardly matters. She is their founding mother. Think back to that quiet conversation between the king and queen. Her request wasn't just about preserving a name. It was about creating an independent vessel for her story. The Kim clan would forever be primarily associated with King Suro, the founder king. By creating the Heo clan, she ensured there would be a massive, enduring group of people whose primary founding story was hers. It was the most successful branding exercise in ancient history. She didn't just get a chapter in her husband's story. She became the author of her own multi-volume epic. So, when you walk the streets of Seoul or Busan today, the evidence of her legacy is all around you. It's not in a museum or a tomb. It is in the names of the people you pass by. The teacher, the tech CEO, the shop owner. Any one of them could be a descendant. Each person carrying the name Heo is a living, breathing testament to her existence, a tiny spark from a flame lit by a forgotten queen 2,000 years ago. The millions of people who carry her name also carry her story. And at the very heart of that story is a single, tantalizing and deeply mysterious place name, Ayutthaya. For well over 1,000 years, this was just a word in an ancient book, a name for a semi-mythical kingdom in a faraway land. But in the modern era, one powerful theory has captured the imagination of not just historians, but diplomats, geneticists, and millions of her descendants. It is the theory that Ayutthaya was, in fact, the ancient and holy city of Ayodhya in India. This idea transforms her story from a Korean foundational myth into an incredible tale of global connection. But is it true? Let's unpack the evidence for and against. You are a detective now, sifting through the clues of history. The case for the India connection rests on several compelling, if circumstantial, pieces of evidence. Exhibit A is the name itself. The Korean chronicle calls her home Ayutthaya. Phonetically, this is incredibly close to Ayodhya, given the way sounds can shift and morph when transliterated between completely different language families. This similarity is a powerful starting point. Exhibit B is the iconographic evidence, perhaps the strongest clue of all: the twin fish. Remember the royal crest of Gaia, the two fish facing each other, a symbol found at the royal tombs? This specific unusual design is not native to Korean art of the period, but it is, and was, a prominent royal and religious symbol in the region of Ayodhya. To have two completely separate, distant cultures spontaneously develop the exact same unique emblem for their royalty seems to defy coincidence. It's a piece of visual evidence that screams of a direct connection. Exhibit C is the physical evidence, the Pasa stone pagoda. As you know, geologists have confirmed the stone is not from Korea, and while they haven't found a perfect match, its mineral composition is consistent with rock types found on the Indian subcontinent. The pagoda itself, a form of Buddhist stupa, is an architectural style that originated in India. Finally, Exhibit D is the logistical possibility. While the journey was immensely long and dangerous, it was not impossible. The thriving maritime trade routes of the 1st century AD, powered by an understanding of the monsoon winds, did connect the Roman Empire, India, Southeast Asia, and China. Queen Heo's voyage would have been at the extreme edge of what was possible, but not beyond it. So, the case looks pretty strong. But now, you must listen to the counter-arguments, and they are significant. The biggest piece of evidence against the India theory is a profound silence. There are no known Indian records from that period, no chronicles, no temple inscriptions, no trade logs, that mention a princess of Ayodhya being sent across the sea to marry a king in a distant eastern land. The marriage of a royal princess was a major event. It would almost certainly have been recorded. This lack of any corroborating evidence from the Indian side is a huge hole in the story. This is where alternative theories gain traction. What if Ayutthaya was not Ayodhya? Some scholars point to the Ayutthaya Kingdom of Thailand. The name is an even closer phonetic match. The main problem, as we've discussed, is that this kingdom was founded over 1,000 years too late. Proponents suggest she came from an earlier kingdom in that same region, but there's no direct evidence for this either. Other historians, particularly in Korea, have suggested origins in China, pointing to certain cultural artifacts. Despite the historical uncertainties, the India connection has been warmly and officially embraced in the modern era. This is a fascinating mainstream historical fact of our times. The story has become a cornerstone of cultural diplomacy between South Korea and India. In the year 2000, the cities of Gimhae and Ayodhya were declared sister cities. A grand memorial to Queen Heo Hwang-ok was built on the banks of the Saryu River in Ayodhya, paid for by a Korean delegation. High-level government officials, including prime ministers and first ladies from South Korea, have made pilgrimages to this memorial. The legend has transcended history and become a powerful, living symbol of a 2,000-year-old friendship. The story's magnetic pull has also led to some less conventional research. In one fantastic, quirky tidbit, a Korean academic in the 20th century claimed that through deep meditation, he was able to divine more details of her journey, including the original Sanskrit name of her boat. While this is certainly not a peer-reviewed methodology, you can just dream your way to a PhD. It shows how deeply this story has entered the realm of myth and personal belief, and so you are left in the middle of a great historical puzzle. Historians still argue whether the India connection is a genuine, if thinly documented, piece of history, or a beautiful modern myth constructed from a handful of tantalizing clues and fueled by the mutual desire of two nations for a shared ancient past. You've seen the evidence. The twin fish and the foreign stone whisper yes. The silent Indian archives and the vastness of the ocean whisper no. The politicians and diplomats declare it to be true, while many academics urge caution. In the end, the lack of a definitive answer is what keeps the story so alive, so powerful. It forces us to weigh the evidence for ourselves, to choose what we believe. And that is the enduring magic of her story. So how do you solve a puzzle like Ayuda? How do you get to the truth of a 2,000-year-old story? The answer is, you have to go to the source. But in this case, the source isn't a person or a place, it's a book. To understand Queen Heo's story, you have to travel forward in time, leaving the 2nd century far behind and landing with a soft thud in a quiet Buddhist monastery in the late 13th century. You are in Goryeo-era Korea, and before you a venerable old monk named Irian is hunched over a stack of paper, his brush moving with scholarly grace. He is compiling the very text that will rescue Queen Heo from oblivion and preserve her story for all time, the Samguk Yusa. The title translates to memorabilia of the three kingdoms, and that word, memorabilia, is key. This is not a straightforward government-commissioned history book filled with dry facts and official decrees. An official history of this period, the Samguk Sagi, already existed. Irian's project was different. He was a cultural conservationist. He set out to collect all the stories that the official histories had left out. The foundational myths, the folk tales, the Buddhist miracle stories, and the strange, wonderful local legends that formed the true cultural bedrock of the Korean people. He was gathering the nation's fireside stories. If the official history was the country's resume, the Samguk Yusa was its secret, slightly embarrassing but utterly charming family photo album. To understand the book, you have to understand the time in which it was written. This is a crucial mainstream historical fact. Irian was writing during one of the darkest periods in Korean history. The Goryeo dynasty was under the brutal thumb of the Mongol Empire. It was a time of devastating invasions, national humiliation, and immense cultural pressure from a powerful foreign overlord. In this context, Irian's work was not just a scholarly exercise, it was an act of profound cultural resistance. By collecting and preserving these uniquely Korean stories, tales of their divine ancestors, their sacred mountains, their unique traditions, he was building a kind of literary fortress around Korean identity. He was reminding his people, at a time when they felt weak and defeated, that they came from a long line of kings born from golden eggs and queens who crossed oceans. So, how do you, as a modern historian, read a text like this? You have to read between the lines, constantly sifting for the kernel of historical truth buried within the rich soil of myth. Irian himself tells us that his source for the Gaia story is an older, now lost book called the Garaguk-gi, or the Record of the Garak Kingdom. This is both helpful and frustrating. It means the story wasn't Irian's invention, but it also adds another layer of separation. He's reporting on a report. When you read his account, you learn to parse the details. The king born from an egg? Almost certainly myth. The queen living to 157? A symbolic exaggeration. But a foreign princess arriving by sea to marry a local king, bringing with her new technologies and cultural ideas? That is entirely plausible. That is the kind of event that happens in the real world. You also have to account for how the story was transmitted for 1,000 years before Irian ever wrote it down. This is a fascinating, quirky tidbit about pre-modern history. Most stories survived through oral tradition. For a millennium, the tale of Queen Heo was kept alive by generations of court storytellers, monks, and grandmothers. It was a grand, multi-generational game of telephone. With each retelling, details would have been polished, boring parts cut, and dramatic elements enhanced. A large rock for ballast becomes a magical pagoda that calms the seas. A successful reign becomes a mythical 157-year lifespan. What Irian was likely writing down was the final, polished greatest hits version of the story, perfected by 1,000 years of oral performance. Furthermore, Irian had his own perspective. He was a devout Buddhist monk, and his faith permeates the entire Samguk Yusa. Historians still argue whether the strong Buddhist elements in Queen Heo's story, the pagoda, her brother the monk, the 7 sons who renounce worldly power for a spiritual life, were part of the original Garrick Kingdom record, or if they were details that Irian, consciously or unconsciously, emphasized or even added to promote his own faith. Was he a neutral collector, or was he an editor with a subtle but powerful religious agenda, eager to give Buddhism a prestigious royal origin in the South? Ultimately, the Samguk Yusa is not a book of answers, but a book of invaluable clues. It's a messy, beautiful, and profoundly important tapestry woven from threads of history, myth, and faith. Queen Heo's story survived not because it was meticulously documented by eyewitnesses, but because a monk, living in a time of national crisis, heard it and believed it was a story that his people needed to remember. To understand her legend, you first have to understand the man who saved it and the remarkable book he wrote. The monk Irian gave us a book of clues written in the 13th century. But what if there was another, much older book? One written not in ink, but in a biological code, a sprawling, epic history passed down faithfully through 2,000 years of descendants. In the 21st century, the search for Queen Heo Huang Ok moves from the dusty library to the sterile white laboratory. The story is no longer just about history and myth, it's about genomics. The clue we're searching for now is written in DNA. The scientific premise is both simple and incredibly complex. The idea is that if Queen Heo really came from a place like India, then her modern-day Korean descendants should carry a tiny, specific genetic signature that is rare among the general Korean population, but more common among people of Indian descent. Think of it like a single exotic spice in a family recipe, passed down for 70 generations. By analyzing the DNA of her descendants, specifically the Gimhae Heo and Gimhae Kim clans, scientists hope to find that ancestral spice. The quest for this genetic proof reached a peak in the early 2000s. You are in the lab now, looking over the shoulder of the researchers. The mainstream historical fact is that in 2004, a team of scientists from Seoul National University conducted a highly publicized study. They took DNA samples from the remains found in Gaia-era tombs in the Gimhae region, the very heartland of Queen Heo's kingdom. They analyzed the mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, which is the genetic information that is passed down exclusively from mother to child. If there was a direct, unbroken maternal link to a foreign land, the mtDNA was the place to find it. The results were electrifying. The study found that the mtDNA from some of these ancient Gaia remains belonged to a haplogroup, a kind of genetic clan, that is rare in modern Northeast Asians but is more commonly found today in South and Southeast Asia. For supporters of the legend, this was the smoking gun. It was front-page news in both South Korea and India. Here, finally, was scientific data that seemed to corroborate the ancient story. The myth wasn't just a myth, it was history, and it was written in the very bones of the Gaia people. But in science, no result is final, and every exciting discovery is met with a healthy dose of skepticism. As the initial excitement faded, other geneticists began to poke holes in the conclusion. The sample size of the study was quite small, making it difficult to draw sweeping conclusions. More importantly, the genetic markers they found were not exclusively Indian. They are also found in populations across Southeast Asia, which would just as easily support the theory that Ayutthaya was in Thailand. And it's also possible that these genetic markers arrived in Korea through other, unrecorded migration events at different times. The DNA proved a foreign connection, but it couldn't prove this specific foreign connection. It was like finding a single, unidentified fingerprint at a crime scene with multiple suspects. This desire for a scientific slam dunk has led to some wonderfully strange moments. In one memorable quirky tidbit, a different research team made headlines by claiming they had analyzed the DNA of a fish skeleton found near the royal tombs. They announced that the fish's DNA was similar to that of a species found only on the Indian subcontinent. The story went viral, proof of the India connection found in a 2,000-year-old fish. However, the claim was quickly and thoroughly debunked by the wider scientific community. The methodology was questionable, and the chances of fragile DNA surviving for 2 millennia in those conditions were next to zero. It was a classic case of what you might call wishful science, and it was, in the end, the ultimate red herring. And so, you are left with a fierce, ongoing scientific discussion. Historians still argue whether the available genetic data provides a statistically significant link to a first-century Indian origin for the Gaia elite, or if the findings are simply too ambiguous to be conclusive. Is the evidence a tantalizing hint of a forgotten migration? Or is it just random noise in the incredibly complex genetic tapestry of Asia? The jury is still very much out. The ultimate key to solving this mystery lies buried under 2 gentle green hills. The holy grail for researchers would be ancient DNA, or aDNA, extracted directly from the remains of Queen Heo and King Suro themselves. The science of aDNA has become so advanced that it can reveal astonishing details about an individual's ancestry, diet, and appearance. But as you know, the royal tombs are considered sacred ground and have never been excavated. This creates a fascinating standoff. The desire for scientific proof is pitted against a deep cultural respect for the dead. The Queen's deepest secret, her own genetic code, remains tantalizingly out of reach. So modern science, which we often look to for definitive answers, has in this case only deepened the mystery. The DNA, like the ancient chronicles, has given us more clues, more possibilities, but no final, satisfying conclusion. The Queen's story remains safe from the cold, hard certainty of fact, locked away in the double helix of her descendants and the sacred, unexcavated earth of her tomb. The science is inconclusive. The historical record is a beautiful but frustrating blend of fact and myth. And all this uncertainty brings us to the central question of our journey tonight. If this queen was a founding matriarch, a cultural innovator, a diplomatic powerhouse, and the ancestor of more than 10% of modern Koreans, why is she so often forgotten? Why isn't her name, Heo Hwang-ok, as globally famous as Cleopatra, as nationally revered as Queen Seondeok of Silla, or as dramatically rendered as Queen Elizabeth I? Why do you have to dig for her story? The primary reason is a simple, brutal rule of history. The winners write the textbooks. The Gaia Confederacy, for all its wealth, its iron, and its sophisticated culture, ultimately lost. The mainstream historical fact that shapes all of Korean history is that the peninsula was eventually unified by the Kingdom of Silla. As Silla grew to become the dominant power, its own history, its own foundational myths, and its own pantheon of heroes naturally took center stage. The stories of its conquered rivals, the kingdoms of Baekje and the city-states of Gaia, were marginalized. They weren't necessarily erased, but they were demoted, becoming supporting chapters in the grand Silla-centric epic of Korean unification. Gaia was recast as a minor league player that was inevitably absorbed by the champions. It's the historical equivalent of being the fantastic opening band that everyone forgets after the headliner plays a 3-hour set. As a result, when you learn Korean history, you learn about the 3 kingdoms, Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla. Gaia is often treated as Gaia, a kind of secondary power that existed alongside them. This historical framing automatically diminishes the importance of its founding monarchs. King Suro and Queen Heo, who were the center of their own universe for a century and a half, become footnotes in someone else's story. There's another, more subtle ideological reason for her fading into the background. As the centuries passed, Korean society, particularly during the powerful Joseon dynasty which began in the 14th century, became deeply influenced by a strict form of Neo-Confucianism. This philosophy, while valuable in many ways, emphasized a rigid social hierarchy and a profoundly patriarchal order. The ideal woman in the Joseon worldview was domestic, chaste and subservient to her father, her husband, and her eldest son. A story about a powerful, foreign-born founding mother who traveled the world on her own, asserted her own authority with her new husband, and even demanded her sons carry her name. Well, it didn't fit the new ideological mold. Her story, with its strong, independent female protagonist, became less of a celebrated ideal and more of an ancient, slightly strange anomaly. It also doesn't help that her brand of power was quieter than that of other famous queens. Take, for instance, the most famous queen of ancient Korea, Seondeok of Silla. This is a great quirky tidbit of comparison. Queen Seondeok, who reigned in the 7th century, was a ruling monarch in her own right. She commanded armies, built the Keomseongdae Observatory, one of the world's oldest, and sponsored the construction of magnificent temples. Her legacy is cast in stone and recorded in the annals of war and statecraft. Heo Hwang Oke's power was the power of a matriarch, a diplomat, and a cultural conduit. It was foundational, but it was softer, less visible to a historian looking for battles and buildings. However, a modern re-evaluation of history is underway. As archaeologists unearth more and more spectacular artifacts from Gaia tombs, a new picture is emerging. Historians still argue whether Gaia should remain a footnote in the Three Kingdoms period, or if it should be recognized as a major maritime power that was for a significant period a true peer and rival to the Big Three. This ongoing rediscovery of the Gaia Confederacy is forcing a reassessment of its importance, and with that comes a renewed interest in its extraordinary founding queen. So it's not quite right to say she was completely forgotten. For her 6 million descendants, she was never forgotten. For the people of the Gimhae region, who hold grand ceremonies at her tomb every year, she is a beloved local hero. Her obscurity has been primarily in the mainstream national and international consciousness. She has been a regional celebrity waiting for a global audience, and in recent decades, thanks to the diplomatic embrace of her story by India and Korea, the tantalizing DNA studies, and this new appreciation for the lost histories of kingdoms like Gaia, she is having a renaissance. Her story was never truly lost. It was just waiting quietly, preserved in a monk's memorabilia in the letters of her family name and in the silent, green mound of her tomb, for a new generation of listeners to find her and to appreciate her for what she truly was. A quiet but world-changing force who shaped a nation from the shadows of official history. So we have found her again, this forgotten queen, hiding in the footnotes of official history. And as we piece together the fragments of her long life, the myth from the monk's chronicle, the clues from the quiet tombs, the faint whispers in the genetic code, a portrait emerges. It is a portrait of a woman who wielded power in a way our history books, so often focused on battles and decrees, frequently overlook. Her story is a masterclass in a different, and perhaps more enduring kind of strength. She was not a warrior queen. She never led an army into battle or wore a suit of iron armor. She was not a reigning sovereign in her own right, issuing laws and edicts like her more famous counterpart, Queen Seondeok of Silla. Her name is not attached to any grand military victory or political conquest. By all the traditional masculine metrics of historical power, she seems a passive figure. But to see her that way is to miss the entire point of her legacy. Her power was influence. It was the subtle, pervasive, and ultimately irresistible force of diplomacy, family, culture, and commerce. She didn't conquer her new kingdom. She transformed it from the inside out. Think back on her journey. Her power was in her calm refusal to be rushed into the palace, a quiet assertion of her own worth that won the king's immediate respect. Her power was in the 10 sons she raised, creating a foundation of stability so solid that it became the kingdom's greatest defense. Her power was in her radical, unprecedented request to give 2 of those sons her own name, ensuring her personal legacy would flow like a river through the next 2 millennia. It was the power of a matriarch, building a nation one child, one marriage, and one family alliance at a time. Her power was in the tea she served, a small ritual that built bridges with a suspicious local nobility. It was in the sophisticated tastes she introduced, pushing her kingdom's artisans to new heights of creativity. Her power was in the global perspective she brought, her knowledge helping to open the sea lanes that would turn a small iron kingdom into a wealthy, cosmopolitan trading power. This was the power of a catalyst, an innovator who gently guided her adopted society toward a more prosperous and sophisticated future. Ultimately, the kingdom she and Suro built did not last forever. The mainstream historical fact is that the Gaia Confederacy was absorbed by the expanding Silla kingdom in the 6th century. In a traditional telling, this marks the end of their story, a failure. But perhaps it was her legacy's greatest triumph. Gumguan Gaia was not destroyed in a brutal war, it was peacefully annexed. Its royal family and nobility were not executed. They were welcomed into the Silla aristocracy. And this is a fascinating, quirky tidbit. The Gimhai Kim and Heo clans were given a high rank in Silla's rigid bone rank caste system, a mark of the profound respect the conquerors had for their divine lineage. The culture, and most importantly the people of Gaia, were integrated, not annihilated. Her diplomatic family-first approach paid off even in defeat. She had built something so respected that even a conquering empire chose to preserve it. In the end, what is her true place in history? Historians still argue whether she should be viewed primarily as a Korean queen, whose exotic origin is a curious footnote, or as a figure of genuine world history, an Indian or Southeast Asian princess whose journey represents one of the most significant and earliest long-distance cultural exchanges in Asia. Is her story a chapter in Korea's history? Or is it a much grander story about how our seemingly separate ancient worlds were, in fact, quietly and profoundly connected? Perhaps she is both. You stand one last time on that ancient shore where our journey began. The mist is rolling in off the sea. A red-sailed ship appears, a phantom from the distant past. For 2,000 years we saw only the ship, a strange and mythical vessel. But now we see the person on board. A 16-year-old girl, a princess, a diplomat, a survivor. A woman who understood that true power isn't always about the clash of iron. Sometimes it is in the quiet, steady, and unbreakable bonds of family. Sometimes it is in the wisdom to build bridges instead of walls. And sometimes it arrives gently, on the evening tide, and changes the world forever. And now the story is told. The memory of the queen can finally rest, and so can you. Let the details begin to soften and fade, like watercolor in the rain. The sharp clang of the blacksmith's forge becomes a distant, gentle chime, then falls silent. The brilliant crimson of her sail dissolves into the evening mist, leaving only the calm, gray surface of the sea. The great green tombs on the hill blur into the landscape, becoming one with the sleeping earth. The weight of 2,000 years of history can lift from your shoulders now, leaving behind only a feeling of peace, a sense of a long journey finally completed. There is nothing left to analyze, nothing more to learn. You are here, in your own quiet space, safe and comfortable. The only sound is the soft hum of the fan. The only feeling is the gentle weight of your blanket. Let your thoughts drift away like ships sailing over the horizon, disappearing into the peaceful emptiness of the night. It's time to let go. It's time to rest. Sweet dreams.